Welcome back to Terrified Tales, where the rain falls slow and the fear creeps in quicker. Like and subscribe before we begin, and tell us where and when you're listening. Midnight, alone, that's when they find you. The workshop smelled of oil and dust, a mixture so thick it seemed almost visible under the jaundiced light bulbs. Evander Price sat hunched over the battered grandfather clock, a relic salvaged from the wreckage of a seaside estate long forgotten. His hands, steady but pale, worked a small screwdriver into the clock's corroded faceplate, the tick-tick-tick of his own battered wristwatch drilling deeper into his mind with every passing second. He hated the sound, but he needed the work. The wood groaned as he pried the back panel loose. Splinters caught his skin, leaving tiny kisses of blood. Behind the gears and rusted chimes, something unexpected. A hidden compartment, its edges sealed with old wax, now cracked from time and neglect. Evander leaned closer. His breath fogged the compartment door, and for a moment, he saw his reflection, tired, hollow-eyed, staring back. He hesitated. His gut tightened. But the instinct to fix overwhelmed the instinct to flee. The door creaked open. Inside lay an hourglass, not pristine, not ornamental, but wounded. The glass was cracked along one bulb, from which a viscous crimson sand bled in slow, rhythmic drops. It stained the tiny wooden platform it sat upon, the droplets drying like scabs on the ancient oak. Evander shivered. "Someone forgot you," he murmured. He lifted the hourglass carefully. It was heavier than expected, almost resistant, like something alive resenting its own disturbance. A sudden gust rattled the loose window panes of the workshop, making Evander flinch. Outside, the coastal mist curled against the glass like searching fingers. A whisper, so soft he wasn't sure it was real, brushed his ear. "Turn it over." Evander dropped the hourglass back onto the table with a clatter. He staggered away, heart pounding, eyes darting across the dim shop for a logical explanation. But the room was still, save for the relentless tick of his wristwatch. He grabbed a nearby cloth and covered the hourglass, shoving it to the back of the workbench. Just tired, overworked. That was all. Behind the dirty cloth, unseen by Evander's wary gaze, the crimson sand continued to bleed, one sorrowful grain at a time. The storm rolled in by morning. Graven Hollow's coastal skies, once grey and dismal, now churned black above the town. Gulls flew crooked paths through the mist, their shrieks swallowed by the moaning wind. Evander Price hunched beneath his long coat as he hurried down the cobblestone streets, the hidden hourglass wrapped tightly in canvas and stuffed deep in his satchel. It should have stayed at the workshop. He knew better than to bring something broken and uninvited into his small home, but the hourglass felt unfinished, somehow asking to be near him. Evander couldn't leave it behind. Its weight in his bag was a constant reminder of its presence, pulling at his thoughts like a subtle tide. His key jammed twice in the old brass lock before the door creaked open. Inside, his house was no haven, merely a hollow museum of clocks, photographs, and the crumbling remnants of a life paused mid-grief. The satchel hit the floor with a dull thud. Evander moved immediately to his living room, yanking heavy curtains across the windows as the storm screamed louder. Rain smacked the glass in rhythmic bursts, tick, 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 matching his pulse too perfectly. He turned back toward the satchel. The canvas inside had darkened with moisture, or was it blood? Evander recoiled, blinking hard. No, just dampness from the rain, surely. His mind was playing tricks on him again. With deliberate care, he pulled the hourglass free. It sat now in the center of his battered oak table, its cracked bulb still leaking thin ribbons of crimson sand. He watched it for a long time, hypnotized. Every few minutes, another grain slipped free and spiraled downward. The steady rhythm began to drown out the storm. Tick, grain falls. Tick, grain falls. without meaning to. His hand drifted forward. He didn't know whether the whisper he heard was in the room or inside his skull. Turn it over. Evander's fingers closed around the frame of the hourglass. It was ice cold, far colder than the room around it. His skin burned at the contact, and for a moment he swore he saw faint black veins running along the wood grain. His heart thudded painfully, his vision tunneled, breath shallow. Before he could think better of it, he turned the hourglass over. The world lurched. The room snapped sideways, the floor heaving like the deck of a ship. Evander staggered backward, knocking over a lamp that shattered with an ugly crash. He gasped, clutching his chest. But the sensation of falling, no, being peeled away, continued, pulling at him from behind his eyes, and then it stopped. The ticking grew deafening. Evander blinked, disoriented. The living room looked the same, smelled the same. But something was off. The storm outside had gone utterly silent. No rain, no wind, only the thick, meaty thump of his own heartbeat. And the ticking. Oh God, the ticking. It came from everywhere, the walls, the furniture, his own skin. He stumbled to the window and yanked the curtain aside. Outside, Graven Hollow was still. People stood frozen mid-stride on the street. A man carrying groceries, suspended in mid-air, the apples falling upward in slow-motion arcs. A child on a tricycle, her mouth stretched in silent laughter, unmoving. The mist was thicker, clinging like a shroud around the town. Evander backed away from the window, hands trembling. "What the hell is this?" he whispered. No answer, only the ticking. His gaze snapped back to the hourglass. Its sand, crimson and shimmering, drained at an impossible speed now, like the last grains of a terrible countdown. His pulse quickened. The oppressive certainty that something awaited the last drop overwhelmed him. Desperate, he lunged forward and tried to flip the hourglass back. The moment his fingers brushed it, a pain seared his palm. He cried out, wrenching his hand away. A red mark, almost like a sigil, began to blossom across his skin, a circle with two lines slicing through it vertically. The hourglass continued to empty. He could do nothing. The last grain fell. A crack tore through the room, deafening like the shattering of a cathedral's stained glass window. Evander screamed. Everything snapped back to normal. The storm roaring once more, rain hammering the roof, distant foghorns groaning from the unseen sea. The people outside moved again, oblivious, as if nothing had happened. Evander sagged to the floor, gasping. The hourglass sat innocently atop the table, its sand once more gathering in the lower bulb. But something had changed. He felt it, dragging. Himself upright, he glanced at the wall clock. It was a battered old pendulum piece he'd restored 2 years ago. The pendulum was missing. No, not missing. It was frozen mid-swing, stuck at an impossible angle. He checked his wristwatch, 43, and yet the clock on the wall read 7:16. The old grandfather clock in the hall chimed once, a low, broken sound, then fell silent. Time had splintered. Evander clutched his head, trying to steady his thoughts. Something else gnawed at his mind, slippery and elusive. What was he doing before the storm hit? Who had he spoken to that morning? He strained to recall. But the memories skittered away like minnows. From a hook, entire hours gone, chewed into oblivion. He stumbled into the kitchen, searching for his phone to call someone, anyone. When he found it, the screen refused to turn on. Black and unresponsive, as if it had been dead for years. A loud creak split the silence. Evander whirled around. Standing in the entryway was a woman, or the suggestion of one, her body made of swirling mist and fragments of broken clock hands. Her head tilted unnaturally, her mouth agape in a silent, wordless scream. Evander froze. The figure raised an arm, disjointed, spasmodic, and pointed a trembling finger at him. The air thickened. Evander's lungs refused to draw breath. The mist woman's mouth finally moved, spilling out words shaped from wind and clockwork. Another turn. Another debt paid. Her form collapsed into nothingness, leaving behind a faint scent of ozone and salt. Evander backed into the living room, shaking violently. He knew this wasn't a single mistake. The first flip had cost him something. His time, his memories, pieces of his very existence. The hourglass wasn't broken. It was hungry, and he had fed it. Tick, tick, tick. The town looked the same, yet Evander knew it was not. The following morning, a thick silver fog swallowed Graven Hollow, muffling the toll of distant church bells into hollow groans. Evander moved through the streets with the hourglass hidden inside his coat, its weight an anchor against his ribs. His eyes darted nervously from shadow to shadow. Every window he passed seemed to watch him. Every pedestrian's face seemed blurred, wrong, slightly out of joint, like old photographs left too long in water. He could feel it, the subtle hum in the air, the scratch of invisible threads pulling at reality's seams. He needed answers. The library loomed out of the mist, an ancient stone relic battered by storms and time, its gargoyles eroded into featureless wraiths. As Evander stepped inside, the musty scent of forgotten pages and mildew enveloped him. Maeva Quinn sat behind the front desk, a patchwork quilt draped over her thin shoulders. She was in her mid-30s, sharp-eyed, her red hair pulled into a frazzled knot. Her fingers tapped a restless beat against the surface of a leather-bound tome. She looked up and frowned. "Evander," she said cautiously, as though testing his name for familiarity. "You're early." "Early," he rasped. His throat was dry, splintered from a night of restless terror. "I didn't know we planned anything." Maeva's frown deepened. "You came yesterday, asked me about the Hollow's artifacts." She hesitated, voice softening. "You don't remember?" Evander blinked, heart hammering. "I wasn't here yesterday," he whispered. Maeva stood, smoothing her skirt. "You brought something, said it was important, something you found in the old Astor estate." The hourglass. Even hidden beneath layers of cloth, he could feel its silent accusation burning against his side. He shook his head, stepping back. I don't." The world tilted. For a split second, he saw Maeva's face fracture, cracks running across her skin like porcelain shattering, clock gears spinning beneath. He blinked, and she was whole again, watching him with wary eyes. "You should come downstairs," she said quietly. "I kept the books out for you." Without waiting, Maeva turned and disappeared into the stairwell that led to the library's restricted basement. Evander hesitated. The walls around him pulsed, faintly, like the slow beat of a massive heart. Against every rational instinct, he followed. The basement was worse than he remembered. Stone walls slick with moisture, iron sconces burning, coldly in their brackets. The air was heavy with mold and something else. Something sweet, metallic and rotten. Maeva was already standing beside a large oak table stacked with crumbling manuscripts and yellowed maps. "You asked about the timekeeper," she said, without looking at him. Her voice echoed strangely, as if spoken twice. "The legend of the bleeding hourglass." Evander's skin prickled. "The timekeeper was a man who tried to trap grief itself," Maeva continued, flipping open a cracked leather folio. "When his wife died, he made a bargain. To capture time and halt sorrow, he created the hourglass with her blood. But time isn't something that forgives theft." She turned a brittle, translucent page toward him. There, sketched in a madman's hand, was the hourglass, cracked, bleeding red sand, crowned by an ancient sigil, the same that now burned faintly across Evander's palm. "You said you had the object," Maeva said. Her eyes, when they met his, shimmered with fear, and something else. Hunger. Evander swallowed. The walls around them breathed. I shouldn't have touched it, he stammered. Maeva's hands gripped the edge of the table so hard her knuckles turned white. It's too late. The first turn is the promise. Every grain that falls eats something. Your time, your memories, your soul. Outside, the storm intensified, the low bellow of thunder rattling the ancient stones. You must not turn it again, Maeva whispered urgently. Each turn calls him closer. Him, the timekeeper. Evander's heart dropped into his stomach. He staggered back, crashing into a low bookshelf. A dusty globe toppled and split open on the ground. Instead of hollow wood, its insides were stuffed with old photographs, sepia-toned images of unfamiliar faces, all scratched out at the eyes, and one photo, caught at the bottom of the pile, turned Evander's blood to ice. It was him, standing outside his workshop, clutching the hourglass in both hands, staring blankly ahead. His mouth hung slightly open in the photo, and from that tiny printed mouth, a single grain of crimson sand spilled downward. He dropped the photograph in horror. The hourglass inside his coat vibrated faintly, the sand whispering inside it. Tick, tick, tick. Maeva, Evander croaked, voice shredded. How do I stop it? Maeva's face paled, her mouth working soundlessly for a moment. You don't, she said at last, voice brittle with helplessness. You can only pay. The library trembled around them. Somewhere, deep beneath their feet, a hidden clock struck 13 times. The library shuddered again, faint but undeniable. Evander clutched the edge of the table, his palm throbbing where the sigils seared into his skin. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to leave Graven Hollow behind, to cast the hourglass into the deepest trench of the ocean. But the knowledge that it would follow, that it had already woven itself into him, anchored him to the cold stone floor. Maeva stepped backward into the shadows, her silhouette fractured by the flickering basement lights. I shouldn't have shown you, she murmured almost to herself. They warned me. The old ones. In dreams. Evander forced the words out, thick and trembling. Warned you about what? Maeva's eyes gleamed with wetness. Memory isn't lost here, it's eaten, traded. Her voice was growing distant, distorted, like a radio tuning between stations. You invited it, she said. You fed it. A gust of ice-cold air howled through the cracks in the stone walls. The ancient tomes fluttered violently, pages tearing themselves free, flurrying into the air like wounded birds. Evander stumbled away from the table, shielding his face. When the wind stilled, he found himself alone. Maeva was gone. Only her quilt lay in a crumpled heap near the stairwell, frayed and threadbare, dust motes drifting lazily above it, as if she'd simply unstitched herself from the world. Maeva, he called hoarsely. No answer. Above, the library groaned, a sound too deep and organic to be merely wood or stone shifting. Something unseen was moving through the upper floors, heavy and deliberate. Evander had to leave. He bolted up the stone steps 2 at a time, each footfall sending muted echoes into the abyss below. The door at the top hung slightly ajar, creaking on rusted hinges. Beyond it, the main floor was almost unrecognizable. Shelves were overturned, books strewn in unnatural patterns across the floor, spirals, circles, fractal shapes that hurt his eyes to look at, and written across the far wall, in what looked like spilled ink or blood, was a message. Turn it again, or fade. The hourglass burned hotter against his ribs. Evander staggered toward the exit, boots slipping on slick, wet pages. As he reached for the door, his reflection caught in the glass pane made him stop cold. He hardly recognized himself. His reflection's mouth was moving independently of his own. It whispered something he couldn't hear, something clawing at the edge of comprehension. Slowly, the reflection raised its right hand, not in a wave, but in a gesture of offering. Its fingers unfurled, and in its palm sat the hourglass, completely full, blood-red sand swirling unnaturally inside. Evander recoiled. Behind him, the sound of ticking filled the library again. But not from a clock, not from any device. It came from beneath the skin of the building itself, from the beating of the walls, the breath of the floorboards, the marrow of the stone. The town was waking. He pushed through. The door into the open air, gasping like a drowning man. The mist outside had thickened further, clotting around the streets and buildings until everything looked ghostly and half-formed. Somewhere far off, he thought he heard the faint metallic chime of a tower bell, but stretched, distorted as if played underwater. The hourglass pulsed in his coat, a living thing now, demanding. He gritted his teeth and stumbled down the empty street, past shuttered windows and sagging signs. A figure moved in the fog ahead, a hunched man dragging something behind him, something that screeched against the cobblestones. Evander slowed. The man paused as if sensing him. Slowly, mechanically, the figure turned its head. Half of his face was missing, replaced by a whirling lattice of gears and cogs, all ticking out of sync. His voice was a broken clock chime. 1 grain for a breath, the figure said. 2 for a heartbeat. 3 for a name. The thing at his feet twitched, a second body, smaller, its hands feebly grasping at empty air. Evander staggered back, bile rising in his throat. He fled down another alley, the fog closing in tighter. He didn't know where he was running anymore. The streets of Graven Hollow twisted impossibly, looping and folding in on themselves like a broken pocket watch. Familiar buildings appeared where they shouldn't. Lampposts bent like wilted flowers, their lights flickering with a sickly red. You were at the end of the alley. He found himself standing before his own workshop. The sign above the door swung in the wind, creaking. But something was wrong. The windows were shattered inward, shards of glass like teeth jutting from the frames. Inside, through the broken door, he glimpsed movement, shadows crawling, slithering. A low voice floated from within, layered and metallic. Time to pay, Evander Price. He backed away slowly, heart hammering. Something brushed his hand. He looked down. A scrap of paper, wet and ragged, clung to his fingers. Scrawled across it in frantic, shaking script were 6 words. Don't turn it, no matter what. He let the paper fall. Behind him, a new sound rose. Not ticking now, but scraping, grinding, as if hundreds of tiny gears were chewing their way up through the earth itself. The hourglass throbbed harder. The mist seemed to press closer, folding him into a tighter and tighter coil. He didn't want to turn it again. But with every breath, every faltering step, the world itself seemed to lean heavier against him, whispering, coaxing. Another turn would buy something. But what would? It cost this time. In the distance, the broken bell tower rang again, 14 times. The sky above Graven Hollow cracked open. Evander barely made it back to his house before the second storm broke loose. Thunder tore through the mist with teeth, and rain lashed the streets in thick, slanted sheets. He slammed the door behind him, twisting the lock with hands that barely obeyed. Inside, the air was heavy, dense with the sour scent of wet wood and something subtler, an old metallic tang, like blood left too long on iron. The hourglass pulsed beneath his coat, burning through the fabric now, a heartbeat of its own. He dropped it onto the living room table and stumbled back, wiping rain from his face. The cloth he had wrapped it in was gone, lost somewhere in the labyrinthine streets. It sat naked on the wood, a cruel thing. Its cracked bulb glistened, fresh crimson grains gathering again. A new fear gripped him. The sand. It was rising, not falling, building up from below, as if the world were bleeding into it. A sudden pounding rattled the front door. 3 knocks, sharp, precise. Evander froze. breath catching in his throat. No one could have followed him through that storm. The knocks came again, slower this time, deliberate. He moved quietly to the peephole. Nothing. Just the thick, boiling mist pressed against the glass. Another knock. This time from the back door. He spun around, heart hammering against his ribs. The back door shuddered visibly, as if pressed by unseen hands. Then another knock, this time from the attic trapdoor above his head. Evander staggered back into the center of the room, eyes darting, trapped. The house was surrounded. No, infected. The hourglass buzzed, a low, gnawing sound. Whispers began to slide beneath the cracks of the doors, wet and sibilant. Turn it, buy your time back. Evander clamped his hands over his ears, teeth gritted against the sound. Just one more turn. He squeezed his eyes shut, but when he opened them, the room had changed. The walls were no longer solid, but cracked and bleeding sand from their seams. The photographs on the mantel blurred into unrecognizable faces, features melting like wax under invisible heat. And standing across the room, framed by the fractured stormlight, was a figure. Jonas Creed. Evander's old friend looked wrong. His skin was slack, too pale, his mouth twitching in a lopsided grin that didn't reach his eyes. "You left me," Jonas said, voice distorted, layered. Evander shook his head. "Jonas, no, I tried to—" "You turned the hourglass, Evander," Jonas said, stepping forward. Sand poured from his eyes in thin, steady streams. "You stole the minutes we needed." Evander stumbled back. "I didn't know," he choked out. Jonas smiled wider, a grotesque stretching of flesh. "Now you do." Another knock, this time from inside the walls. Another flash of lightning. Jonas was gone. Only the hourglass remained, its sand swirling faster now. A violent red storm trapped behind fragile glass. A low groaning came from beneath the floorboards. The house shuddered, and the ticking grew louder. Every second longer, Evander hesitated. The world seemed to decay around him, reality peeling back in wet, hissing strips. He stumbled toward the table. His hand hovered above the hourglass. Another flash of lightning revealed the cracked grandfather clock in the hallway. Its pendulum was swinging again. Only now it swung backward. Time was coming undone. He grabbed the hourglass. The glass was warm, almost pulsing, a final whisper, close to his ear. "Turn it. Save yourself." Evander squeezed his eyes shut, and against everything screaming inside him, he flipped it over. The storm outside immediately ceased. Silence. Slammed down over the world with a force that rattled the windows. Evander opened his eyes. The house was intact. The photographs were restored, crisp and smiling. The walls were solid once more, even the smell of blood and rot was gone. He staggered toward the front window and pulled aside the curtain. Outside, Graven Hollow gleamed under a pale, indifferent moon. People walked the streets normally, oblivious to the horror that had gripped him minutes before. Evander sagged against the window frame, exhaling shakily. It was over. But as he turned away, something caught his eye in the reflection of the glass. His own face flickered. For just a moment he saw another version of himself, hollow-eyed, mouth sewn shut with red thread, sand trickling endlessly from the stitches. The image vanished. Evander backed away, a cold sweat breaking out along his spine. The hourglass sat quietly on the table again, innocent, almost inviting. But he knew better. Every turn came with a price. And somewhere deep inside, he knew. He had just paid again, and the debt was still growing. The dream was too vivid to dismiss. Evander sat bolt upright in bed, lungs gasping for air that felt thick and wrong. His sheets clung to him, soaked with cold sweat. The room was bathed in a strange amber glow, though no light shone from the windows. He knew immediately this was not his world anymore. The hourglass sat on his nightstand, silently bleeding crimson sand across the wood. He hadn't brought it upstairs. He was sure of it. Evander swung his legs over the edge of the bed and stood unsteady. The floorboards felt softer than they should, almost spongy, like he was walking atop something living. Every step he took left faint, dark footprints behind him. The ticking was back, louder, faster. He turned toward the hallway, drawn by a sound at once familiar and monstrous, a woman's voice singing, broken and off-key. Hickory, dickory, dock. The song lilted through the air, distorted, as if played through a cracked phonograph. Evander moved toward it, heart hammering. The hallway had changed, its walls bowed inward like a throat swallowing him. The photographs lining the walls showed strangers now, men, women, children, all frozen mid-scream, their faces blurred by the motion of time gone wrong. At the end of the hall, a door stood open, spilling that sickly amber light. Evander hesitated. From within, the singing grew louder, desperate. The mouse ran up the clock. He took a breath he didn't believe in and stepped through. Inside was a room he didn't recognize, an endless clockmaker's workshop stretching in all directions, filled with clocks that screamed instead of chimed. The walls wept sand. The ceiling spun slowly overhead, gears grinding against a sky made of bone. In the center of the room stood her, Leah, his fiancée, but not as he remembered. Her face twisted in unnatural angles, her skin translucent and stitched with faint black thread. Her mouth moved in time with the nursery rhyme, though her eyes pleaded silently for him to save her. Evander staggered forward. Leah? His voice cracked. Leah, no. What happened to you? Her head tilted, jointed wrong like a marionette. She raised her hands. They bled crimson sand from the fingertips. The clocks around them began to convulse, vomiting gears and springs onto the floor, ticking faster and faster, spinning toward some terrible climax. Leah's stitched mouth opened wider than humanly possible, and from it poured not words, but the sound of all the minutes Evander had ever wasted, each heartbeat he had thrown away in grief, in guilt. And then she spoke. "Flip it again," she said, her voice layered and ancient. "Bring me back." Evander shook his head violently, tears blinding him. "I can't," he gasped. "I won't." The hourglass floated before him, suspended in the air, rotating slowly, bleeding grains that formed words in mid-air. "You promised." "No!" Evander cried, backing away. "I didn't!" The room shuddered. The clocks melted into the walls. The sky collapsed inward, and Leah's twisted figure lurched toward him, mouth gaping wide enough to swallow him whole. Evander stumbled back and fell. He woke up on the floor of his living room, tangled in the spilled remnants of an overturned lamp. Morning sunlight, pale and insipid, leaked through the windows. The hourglass sat quietly on the coffee table, unchanged, indifferent. His hands were shaking uncontrollably. Evander staggered into the bathroom and splashed cold water on his face. When he looked up into the mirror, he screamed. Half his reflections. Face had been replaced, stitched, ragged, leaking sand from the seams. He smashed the mirror with his fists, shattering it into 100 bleeding shards. Gasping, he backed against the wall, clutching his injured hand, blood dripping onto the tiles. The world spun again, another clock wound backward, and Evander realized something he hadn't before. The dream hadn't been a dream. A new scar, thin and black, now ran along his jawline. Stitches he did not remember, pieces of himself were already being claimed. And time, once broken, was beginning to forget him too. The second hand was gone, not just from his clocks, but from him. And the ticking inside his chest. It wasn't his heartbeat anymore. It was counting. Down. The morning dragged Evander through it like a river pulling a broken branch. He bandaged his bleeding hand as best he could, wrapping the wound in torn strips of linen he found under the sink. Every movement felt wrong, delayed, like the seconds between thought and action had stretched thin and ragged. He had to find Dr. Ellis Rowe. If anyone in Graven Hollow knew what this hourglass truly was, or how to survive it, it would be the old horologist who lived above the crumbling pawn shop near the wharf. Evander shoved the hourglass deep into his satchel and stepped out into the mist. The town had changed again. The streets buckled at strange angles. Street lamps bent inward, whispering with voices carried by the mist. Shop fronts flickered, their signs displaying different names every time he blinked. At the far end of Crooked Lane, the pawn shop leaned precariously against its neighbors, its windows blacked out with old newspaper clippings about disappearances and storms. The bell above the door gave a single, broken clang as Evander entered. Inside, it smelled of brass, dust, and old regrets. Dr. Rowe sat at a cluttered desk under a halo of broken clocks. He was a withered man, folded into himself like a dying spider, spectacles glinting as he peered through layers of grime at some delicate mechanism in his trembling hands. When he saw Evander, his face paled beneath the lattice of liver spots. "You," he rasped. "You brought it out." Evander swallowed, heart hammering. "I didn't know," he said, voice raw. "I didn't even know what it was." Rowe laughed, a dry, broken sound that barely stirred the stale air. "You never know," he said, setting down his tools with trembling care. "That's how it begins. A touch, a turn, a promise you don't remember making." Evander approached cautiously, the satchel pressing like a stone against his side. "You know about the hourglass," he said. It wasn't a question. Rowe nodded once, a slow, painful movement. His eyes were bloodshot and unfocused, swimming in memories that no longer belonged to him. "Before the lighthouse fell," Rowe whispered, "there was a watchmaker here. Built time into the bones of the hollow. Thought he could outwit death itself." He leaned closer, his breath rattling like dry leaves. "But time isn't a tool, it's a beast. It feeds." Evander's hands curled into fists. "How do I stop it?" Rowe shook his head, sorrow softening his lined face. "You can't stop what you already started," he said. "The hollow made a deal, and you flipped the glass, set the wheel spinning." Again, he gestured toward the broken clocks above them. "Every tick, every tock is a mouthful of you disappearing." Evander's stomach twisted. "What happens when the last grain falls?" he asked, voice barely audible. Rowe's gaze sharpened, focusing for the first time. "You're not afraid of dying, boy," he said. "You're afraid of forgetting." A gust rattled the windows. Evander shifted, the satchel bumping against the counter. Rowe's expression changed, tightened. "You brought it here," he hissed. "No, Evander started, but it was too late. The hourglass inside the satchel woke. The old clocks in the shop began to chime, one by one, their bells cracked and dissonant. Time itself twisted. The shadows on the walls jittered, snapping back and forth like a broken reel of film. Rowe staggered back, hands raised as if to ward off a fire. "You have to get it out," he cried. "It's hungry here." The clocks above their heads burst open, spilling sand, not gears, crimson sand. It hissed as it touched the floor, burning tiny smoking holes in the wood. Evander stumbled toward the door, fumbling with the latch. Behind him, Rowe shouted words that barely made sense, names, dates, half-forgotten warnings swallowed by the rising roar of the broken clocks. The mist outside surged into the shop like a living thing. Swallowing everything behind him, Evander barely escaped into the street, slamming the door behind him. Through the cracked glass, he glimpsed Rowe, frozen mid-scream, as the mist solidified around him like cooling wax. And the clocks fell silent. Evander leaned against the wall, gasping, his chest heaving. He clutched the satchel close, feeling the hourglass vibrating like a heartbeat inside. Rose's last words burned into his skull. Not death, not time. Memory is the price. As he stumbled away, the pawn shop collapsed into itself without a sound, leaving only a wet patch of crimson sand on the cobblestones where it had once stood. The hollow had claimed another, and Evander understood now. It would not stop until it had everything. Evander wandered the streets of Graven Hollow like a broken compass, aimless, the satchel clutched tight to his chest. The mist thickened around him, alive with shifting figures and whispered regrets he could almost, but not quite, understand. The town no longer obeyed the rules of geography or reason. Alleys folded into themselves. Doorways led to endless staircases that bled into the sea. Even the church steeple swayed as if drunk on the weight of its own bells. Everywhere he turned, the ticking followed, sometimes fast like a heartbeat in terror, sometimes slow like the last drips of water from a noose-soaked gallows. By the time he reached the docks, the storm had receded into a bruised, unnatural dusk. Boats floated idly on a motionless sea, their reflections smeared across the surface, like oil. Salt hung thick in the air, metallic and choking. Evander sat down hard on a rotting bench, pulling his coat tighter around him. His mind was fraying, slipping at the edges. Memories came and went like passing trains, none of them stopping long enough to grasp. A hollow laughter drifted across the empty pier. He lifted his head. At the end of the dock, where the world faded into mist and water, stood a figure. An old woman, draped in layers of black rags that fluttered in a wind Evander couldn't feel. Her hair was wild and salt white, whipping across her cragged face. In one skeletal hand, she held a battered oil lantern. The other clutched something close to her chest, a bundle wrapped tightly in linen. Evander stood slowly. The Salt Widow. He knew her from the whispers, the drunken warnings slurred in the tavern corners. She's the last wife of the sea. She trades your breath for memory. She knows the debts that the hollow demands. The woman turned her face toward him. Her eyes were black pits, deep and endless. You carry it, she rasped, voice grinding against the silence. Evander didn't answer. The lantern's light flared briefly, revealing more horrors. Her shadow stretched impossibly far behind her, and within that shadow, dozens of tiny hands clawed outward, frozen in agony. You flipped it, she said, stepping closer across the boards that didn't creak beneath her feet. Twice now, 2 debts paid. Evander's throat tightened. He backed away a step. I didn't know, he whispered. I didn't. She cut him off with a cackling laugh that collapsed into a coughing fit. No one knows, she said. That's the bargain, that's the joke. She unwrapped the bundle in her arms. Inside was a tiny hourglass, no larger than a child's toy, filled not with sand, but with teeth, tiny milk-white teeth grinding slowly against each other as they fell. Evander recoiled. She extended it toward him. A trade, she said. One truth for one turn. He hesitated. The hollow around him shifted, breathed. He could feel the hourglass, in his satchel growing hotter, heavier. It wanted him to turn it again. It hungered for it. Evander licked his dry lips. What truth? He asked, voice cracking. The Salt Widow's smile was a jagged crack in her weathered face. The truth about her, she crooned. The one you dream of. The one whose name you're beginning to forget. Leah. He could barely see her face in his mind. Now, it blurred, slipping through his thoughts like smoke. He needed to remember. He needed to. Evander reached for the tiny hourglass in the Salt Widow's hand. Her fingers tightened around it. Know this, she hissed. Every truth you learn, you lose something else. Memories are the currency of this place. Pay wisely. Evander hesitated, then snatched it. The glass bit into his palm, impossibly cold. The teeth inside clattered madly, a sound that vibrated up his spine. The Salt Widow leaned close, her breath like rotten seawater. Leah never meant to wait for. "You," she whispered. "She tried to cross over that night. Tried to leave you behind." Evander staggered back as the words struck like a blade. "No," he gasped. "That's not true. She loved." The Salt Widow only laughed, a hollow sound that faded into the mist, and with her departure, something precious slipped from Evander's mind, a favorite memory, a small, warm thing. Leah laughing on the night they first met, spilling wine across his shirt, her eyes wide, with horror before dissolving into helpless giggles. Gone. He could feel the hole where it used to be, cold and aching. The tiny hourglass in his hand cracked in two and disintegrated into dust, blowing away on a wind that didn't touch anything else. The real hourglass inside his satchel pulsed once, as if savoring the loss. Evander sank to his knees on the dock. Tears slid down his face unnoticed. The hollow wasn't just taking his time, it was unmaking him, piece by piece, laugh by laugh, breath by breath. In the far distance, deep beneath the frozen waters of the bay, something ancient and colossal stirred. The surface of the sea rippled outward in slow, concentric circles, a warning. The Salt Widow's voice drifted back from somewhere unseen. "Turn it again, boy. Turn it again, or be forgotten by everything you ever loved." Evander clutched the satchel tight to his chest, the hourglass within vibrating steadily, patiently, cruelly. It was only a matter of time, and time was running out. The fog didn't lift that night. It thickened into something heavier, wetter, crawling across Graven Hollow like a living skin. Lights flickered out one by one across town, swallowed by the creeping grey. The hollow's pulse had slowed to a funeral beat. Evander sat by the cracked fireplace, staring into the ashes. The hourglass rested atop the mantelpiece, its bleeding sand frozen mid-drop, as if mocking the very idea of gravity. It hummed low, vibrating against the wood with each desperate heartbeat that thudded in his chest. He hadn't flipped it again. Not yet. The Salt Widow's warning still coiled inside him, acidic and gnawing. Every truth cost something. Every survival demanded a toll. Somewhere outside, the mist churned and shifted. Footsteps crunched against the gravel path leading to his door. Evander stood sharply, heart hammering. A shadow moved past the window. A figure, tall and broad, dragging something behind it that scraped across the stones with a hollow, metallic shriek. A heavy knock rattled the door on its hinges. 3 times. Slow. Certain. Evander approached cautiously, one hand pressed against the satchel where the hourglass still pulsed, the other hovering near the latch. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice thinner than he intended. Silence. Then a familiar voice, worn, cracked, but unmistakable. "Evander, open up." He froze. Jonas Creed. It couldn't be. It shouldn't be. Jonas had left town years ago after the accident, after the funeral. After everything fell apart, and yet Evander's hand moved to the lock almost involuntarily, drawn by the old gravity of friendship and guilt. He twisted it. The door swung inward with a low groan. Standing there, haloed by the mist, was Jonas, or something that wore his skin. At first glance, it was him, the sharp jaw, the crooked nose broken in a bar fight long ago, the tattered leather jacket he never went anywhere without. But there were differences too. His eyes were wrong, too flat, too deep, like looking into 2 small, perfectly round clocks whose hands spun too fast to see. Evander stumbled back a step. "Jonas?" he managed, voice breaking. The figure nodded once. "Slow and deliberate. You left me," Jonas said, stepping across the threshold. The mist slithered in with him, curling around Evander's ankles like grasping hands. "I didn't know," Evander stammered. "I didn't know what would happen." "You forgot me," Jonas said. His voice was low and dangerous now, vibrating the glass in the window panes. "No," Evander whispered. "I tried to hold on. I tried." Jonas reached into his jacket and pulled something out. Evander flinched. It wasn't a weapon. It was a photograph. A torn, stained photograph of the two of them, younger, arms slung around each other's shoulders, laughing like fools. Their smiles stretched wide, real and alive. Jonas held it up between two fingers. The photo's surface rippled, and in the space where Evander's face should be, there was only a blank smear of sand. "You flipped it," Jonas said, voice cold enough to crack stone. "You paid for more time, and you used me to do it." Evander shook his head frantically. "I didn't mean to," he said. "I didn't know the cost." Jonas stepped closer. His skin began to peel back in places, revealing the intricate machinery beneath. Cogs turning, springs coiling, red sand pouring steadily from the joints. "You knew," Jonas said. "You felt it. You just didn't care." The hourglass on the mantelpiece shuddered violently. Cracks spiderwebbed across the glass. A terrible pressure filled the room, making Evander's bones ache. The walls of the house warped inward, the fireplace twisting into a blackened, yawning mouth that belched ash and gears. Jonas moved faster than Evander could react. He grabbed Evander by the collar and slammed him against the wall, pinning him there with inhuman strength. "You left me," Jonas hissed into his ear. "Now you'll know what it feels like." Sand poured from Jonas's mouth with each word, hot and stinking of rust. Evander struggled, but it was like fighting a statue. The hourglass tumbled from the mantelpiece and shattered on the floor. A shockwave ripped through the house. For a brief, excruciating moment, Evander saw everything, every lost second, every abandoned memory, every friend he had failed to save. Jonas let go. Evander collapsed to his knees, coughing, sand spilling from his own mouth now, gritty and metallic against his tongue. When he looked up, Jonas was gone. Only the torn photograph remained, smouldering slowly in the center of the floor. The edges blackened, curled, the faces faded. Evander staggered upright, dizzy, half blind. The mist outside pressed harder against the windows now, an endless ocean of grey swallowing the world. He realized with a sick, sinking certainty the irreversible had already happened. He had forgotten Jonas. And not just his face or his voice, the memories themselves, the nights spent drinking, the arguments, the blood oath they made the night they promised never to leave each other behind. All of it was slipping away, ground down into crimson sand. Jonas was dead, and worse, he had been erased, not by fate, not by time, by Evander and The hourglass, cracked and hissing on the floor, was still hungry, still waiting, still counting down. Evander clutched his head and screamed into the empty house, but no one answered. Graven Hollow heard only the ticking, always ticking. The house was silent now, except for Evander's raw, ragged breathing and the faint, gritty sound of sand shifting across the wooden floorboards. He sat slumped against the wall, staring at the shattered hourglass lying in a pool of crimson grains. Its two glass bulbs had split apart like a broken heart, leaking time across the room in slow, inevitable drifts. The air smelled wrong, not just musty or salty or stale, wrong, like something old and rotten blooming behind the walls. Each breath Evander drew scraped his throat raw, heavy with invisible grit. He coughed once, hard. A sharp, metallic taste exploded in his mouth. He bent over, coughing again, harder this time, and spat onto the floor. Not blood, sand, thick, dark red, grains, Panic seized him. He clutched his throat, heaving, but more sand poured from his mouth, spilling between his fingers, cascading down his chest like a perverse hourglass turned inside out. He stumbled to his feet, dizzy, choking. The walls seemed to sway around him, bleeding soft drifts of crimson dust from every crack and nail. The seams between floorboards split wider, disgorging rivers of sand that buried his shoes, his ankles, threatening to pull him down. "You're losing yourself," a voice whispered from somewhere behind the walls. Evander lurched into the bathroom, falling hard against the sink. His reflection stared back at him, wild-eyed and eroding, his hair thinned before his eyes. His skin cracked at the edges, thin seams opening along his jaw and down his neck, grains of sand leaking steadily from the fractures. "No," he gasped, gripping the edges of the sink so hard the porcelain creaked. He turned on the faucet, splashing cold water over his face, desperate to wash away whatever nightmare clung to him. But the water itself came out thick, tinted red, filled with silt and grit. He screamed and staggered back. From deep within the mirror, his reflection smiled, a slow, unnatural stretching of lips that showed no teeth. Only darkness. The mirror's surface rippled, a hand, not Evander's, pressed against the other side of the glass, thin, pale fingers with nails blackened and cracked. Another hand appeared, and another. They clawed at the barrier, scratching spiderweb. Fractures into the glass. Evander stumbled from the bathroom, nearly blind with terror. The house pulsed around him, walls warping in and out like lungs gasping their last breath. Every clock, even broken ones, began ticking again, but out of sync, creating a chaos of sound that battered at his sanity. Somewhere in the din, he heard the Salt Widow's voice again. Turn it again, or become dust in the hollow. He tripped. Over something in the hallway, the satchel. The hourglass, whole again, sat inside. Its glass was no longer cracked. Its sand gleamed bright and red, swirling upward instead of falling, defying gravity, defying reason. Evander crawled toward it, coughing, leaving a trail of crimson sand behind him. His mind raced. If he turned it again, what would he lose? A name, a face, his entire self. He thought of Leah, her fading laughter, her dissolving smile. He thought of Jonas, already reduced to nothing more than a torn photo and the ghost of betrayal. The satchel shifted. The hourglass pushed against the fabric, desperate to be freed, to be flipped, to be fed. Tears streamed down Evander's face. He couldn't fight this thing much longer. His body was failing him, his memories were fading. His soul itself was slipping grain by grain into the hollow's hungry mouth. Through the broken front window, he glimpsed the town. Graven Hollow was changing, buildings tilted at impossible angles, as if the earth beneath them twisted like a screw. People in the streets moved with jerky, puppet-like motions, strings of sand spilling from their sleeves, their mouths, their eyes. The sky above churned, a vast mechanical mass of black gears turning slow and ponderous, blotting out the stars. Evander knew, deep in the rotted marrow of his bones, this wasn't just about him anymore. The more he flipped the hourglass, the more he fed it, the more Graven Hollow sank into its curse. He clutched the satchel tighter, feeling the hourglass's heartbeat throb against his chest. It wanted another turn. It needed it. He dragged himself to the living room, coughing sand with every step. The shattered remains of the first hourglass still lay there, but now the grains were moving, tiny rivers of red sand slithering toward the satchel, weaving themselves into the seams, mending the damage. It can't be killed, Evander realized. It can only be fed, or left to consume everything. The front door creaked. A figure stood there, Maeva Quinn, or what was left of her. Her skin was papery and translucent, stretched tight over her bones. Her hair hung in limp, wet ropes. Her mouth was sewn shut with black thread, and yet somehow she spoke, not with words, but through the grinding of invisible gears. "You can't fight it," she intoned. "You can only choose how much you lose." Stepped closer, her body leaking sand with every shuddering movement. "Turn it," she whispered, voice cracking the plaster on the walls. Evander squeezed his eyes shut. The hourglass pulsed harder. Behind his eyelids, he saw flashes. Leah's face nearly erased, calling for him across a sea of blood. Jonas screaming, buried beneath an avalanche of red dust. His own body, crumbling into a statue of sand, hollow and forgotten. A sob broke free of him. He knew what choice the Hollow wanted him to make, but knowing didn't make it easier. The hourglass pressed against his ribs like a lover's desperate, and he had to decide, and soon, before he lost even the memory of why it mattered. The streets of Graven Hollow no longer resembled anything Evander knew. He stepped outside into a world gone wrong. The fog had thickened into something more solid, a glutinous mass that swallowed sound and light alike. Houses sagged and leaned against each other like drunks, their windows yawning open, spilling ribbons of red mist. The ground shifted underfoot, not cobblestone anymore, but something softer, something that shifted when he stepped, like ash or bone dust. Everywhere, the ticking persisted, fast now. Frantic, Evander clutched the satchel close, the hourglass inside vibrating with a feverish rhythm. His chest burned with every breath, as if each inhalation scraped him raw from the inside. Sand leaked steadily from the corners of his mouth, the crooks of his eyes, the folds of his coat. He moved forward. He had no choice. The Hollow men were waiting. The first he saw stood at the corner of Tidewater Street, where the bakery once sold warm loaves and candied nuts. It was a man, or had been, a featureless figure made of tightly packed sand, dressed in the rotting remnants of a fisherman's coat. Its face was smooth, blank, save for a single black line where a mouth should have been. It tilted its head. As Evander passed, a dry crackling noise rattling from within its hollow chest. Further along, others emerged from doorways and broken windows. School teachers with sand pouring from their empty sleeves. Children dragging dolls behind them that bled tiny streams of dust. Businessmen in ruined suits. Ladies with parasols crumbling into powder. Their heads turned as he approached. Their faceless attention weighed on him like lead. Evander tightened his grip on the satchel and kept walking. He needed to reach the old Astor Tower, the heart of the curse, the place where the first clock had been built, where time had been broken. Maybe there he could undo this. Maybe there he could find whatever shred of himself remained. The Hollow men fell into step behind him, silent, relentless. As he passed, one of them reached out a hand, a woman's hand, delicate and crumbling at the fingertips, and brushed his eye sleeve. For a moment, Evander saw flashes of her life, a wedding by the sea, a baby's first cry, a final, lonely breath taken in a room that smelled of salt and rot. Then it was gone. The Hollow reclaimed her memories. Evander stumbled onward, heart racing. Every few steps, another Hollow man or woman joined the silent procession behind him, a growing cortege of the forgotten. He risked a glance backward. Dozens now. Their blank faces stared at him with empty longing, as if hoping he might somehow free them, or join them. At the edge of town, near the iron bridge that sagged under the weight of rust and neglect, Evander paused. The Astor Tower loomed ahead, a spire of black stone wrapped in decaying ivy, its broken clock face gaping open like a blind eye. The tower leaned at a sickening angle, defying physics, barely tethered to the world. Lightning cracked the sky above it, revealing shapes, terrible shapes, writhing within the broken gears. The ground before the tower was littered with statues. At least they looked like statues at first. People, frozen mid-run, mid-scream, mid-beg. Their bodies crumbled at the edges, faces erased by endless grains of sand skimming across them like a rasp. Evander took a step forward, and the hollow men behind him did the same. A single, synchronized motion. The door of the tower creaked open. Inside, darkness yawned. Evander hesitated, heart pounding in his ears. Another step. The hollow men pressed closer, their dry breathing now audible, a faint susurrus like the shifting of dunes. He crossed the threshold. Inside, the world went silent. No ticking, no breathing, no heartbeats. Only the terrible awareness that time itself had thinned here, stretched to the breaking point. The entry hall was a cathedral of broken machinery. Gears the size of carriages lay half buried in the floor. Chains dangled from the ceiling, swaying in an invisible breeze. Clock hands jutted from the walls at random angles, each one twitching spasmodically. At the center of the room stood a dais, and on the dais, another hourglass. This one was massive, 12 feet tall, its bulbs forged from blackened glass that pulsed with internal light. The sand inside was pure shadow, swirling and folding in impossible patterns. It took Evander a moment to realize what he was seeing. The sand contained faces, thousands of them, screaming, pleading, vanishing. The hollow men filed into the hall behind him, forming a silent, expectant ring around the room. Waiting, watching. The satchel throbbed against Evander's chest. The small hourglass inside grew heavier, hotter, until it burned like a brand. He dropped the satchel with a cry, clutching his scorched chest. The hourglass inside slid free, rolling across the floor. It came to a stop at the base of the black hourglass on the dais. The two resonated together, a low, keening vibration that filled Evander's skull with static. He staggered toward the dais, sand spilling from his mouth, his ears, his nose. Each step felt like wading through quicksand. The hollow men began to sway gently, their featureless heads nodding in unison. They wanted him to turn it again, to feed the great hourglass, to lose the last of what he was. He reached out a shaking hand. The black glass pulsed once as if inhaling. A voice, deep and endless, spoke from nowhere and everywhere. One more turn, one more gift, one more piece of yourself. Evander's fingers brushed the smaller hourglass. Time paused. In that breathless moment, he saw what waited if he obeyed. His body hollowed out, a new hollow man, featureless and forgotten, his memories reduced to grains of sand spinning eternally inside the great black hourglass. His soul trapped forever in the machinery of the hollow. He recoiled. "No," he rasped. "No more." The hollow men hissed, a sound like 1,000 clocks winding down. The great hourglass trembled on its pedestal. The ground shook, a low grinding that vibrated through Evander's bones. He turned and ran. The hollow men surged forward. Hands of dust and despair clawed at him, tried to pull him down. He kicked free, stumbling toward the broken stairwell at the side of the hall. Upward, higher, toward the heart of the curse. Behind him, the hollow howled. Ahead, the stairwell spiraled into darkness, and above it all the ticking resumed, faster now, hungry, relentless, counting down the seconds until there was nothing left of Evander Price but sand and silence. The stairwell spiraled upward like the throat of some vast dying creature. Evander stumbled through the choking dark, every step a battle against the pulsing gravity of the great hourglass below. The walls were slick with condensation, or perhaps the seepage of time itself, leaking from the cracks in this wounded place. The ticking chased him, louder now, closer, each beat synchronized with the hammering of his failing heart. At the top of the stairwell, he slammed into a heavy wooden door, warped and groaning on its hinges. Fumbling, gasping, he shoved it open. The room beyond was a library, or what remained of one, a vast rotunda lined with towering shelves, sagging under the weight of ancient tomes and crumbling ledgers. Thick red sand blanketed the floor, half burying broken furniture and shattered glass cases. Dim light filtered through a fractured skylight high above, painting everything in sickly tones of rust and gold. The air smelled of mold, ink, and the sharp metallic tang of blood long dried. Evander staggered inward, boots sinking into the sand. The walls whispered. He paused, every hair on his body rising. The whispering wasn't in his mind, it was real. The books were speaking. Soft, desperate murmurs oozed from between their pages. Half-remembered conversations, last words, dying breaths trapped in parchment prisons. He pressed forward, ignoring the way the sand seemed to drag at his ankles like grasping hands. At the center of the room, beneath the collapsed remains of an ornate chandelier, he found a pedestal. On it sat a massive book, bound in cracked leather. Its cover bore no title. Only a symbol burned into the hide, an hourglass crossed by two broken lines. The same sigil burned into Evander's palm. He hesitated, the whispers thickened around him, rising in urgency. Touch it, they urged. Read, no. He reached out, and the second his fingers brushed the leather, the book sprang open, pages fluttering in a furious storm. Words bled up from the parchment, floating in the air, arranging themselves into images and voices. He saw a man standing in the same tower, centuries. Argo, the first timekeeper, tall, gaunt, eyes burning with feverish purpose. He wore robes stitched with clockwork sigils, and around his neck hung an amulet, a smaller hourglass filled with glittering black sand. Time, the man intoned, voice echoing through unseen chambers, is a river. It devours, it forgets. I will stop its mouth with my own blood if I must. Evander watched as the timekeeper performed a terrible ritual. He slit his wrist over a giant clockwork heart, mixed blood with sand, bound his own soul to the mechanism, created the bleeding hourglass, not to master time, but to trap it, to anchor grief, pain, loss, to hold the worst moments forever in amber. But the hollow rebelled. The land, the sea, even the very stones of grave and hollow turned against the unnatural binding. Instead of freezing sorrow, the ritual birthed a hunger deeper than any death, a hunger for memory, identity, existence itself, and the timekeeper. Evander saw him twisted into something inhuman, his body swallowed by gears and shadow, his soul spun into the endless sands of the hourglass he had forged. The vision ended with a sharp snap. Evander staggered back, clutching his head. The pedestal cracked down the center, releasing a gout of crimson sand that poured into the air, spinning into screaming faces before dissipating. Behind him, the hollow men began to creep into the library, silent, hesitant, afraid. Even they feared the knowledge now leaking from the broken book. Evander wiped blood from his nose and stood shakily. There, scrawled into the base of the pedestal, he found a final message. Not printed, not whispered, carved deep over and over into the wood. There is no saving time, only saving yourself. He stared at it, hollow. The truth clawed at him. He could not fix the hollow. He could not save graven hollow. The best he could hope for was escape. If he turned the hourglass again, he might buy himself another day, another hour. But every flip cost pieces of him he could never reclaim. He would survive, but at what price? The hourglass in his satchel trembled violently, responding to the unspoken choice. Sand streamed from the cracks in the ceiling now, drifting downward like ash from a burning sky. The hollow men parted. Someone new stepped into the library. Maeva, or rather what was left of her. Her body was stitched with black thread, her mouth stretched wide in a broken smile that did not touch her dead eyes. She moved stiffly, jerkily, a marionette dancing on invisible strings. "You found it," she said, voice stitched together from a dozen whispers. Evander backed away. Maeva raised one trembling hand. "You know what must be done," she rasped. "Turn. It one last time, bury it deep, take the hollow with you." He shook his head violently. "I can't," he gasped. "I won't. You will," she said. Behind her, the hollow men nodded in grim unison. The tower trembled. The great black hourglass in the atrium below howled, a sound that tore through the stone like a hurricane. The end was coming. Evander fell to his knees in the sand, clutching the satchel. The hourglass within pulsed once, twice, faster now, desperate. Through blurred vision, he saw Maeva's stitched smile widen. "You are the last," she whispered. "You are the key." Evander screamed in rage and despair, punching the sand with bleeding fists. He had no good choices, only delays, only sacrifices, only sand. The ticking quickened around him, louder than thunder, louder than thought, and somewhere, buried beneath it all, he heard the faintest echo. One last turn. Still here? Brave. Or maybe you just like the feeling of being watched. Like, subscribe, and drop your time and location in the comments, so we know who's still out there. Now breathe slow. The worst is coming. The ticking grew unbearable. It wasn't just sound anymore. It was pressure. Behind his eyes, in the marrow of his bones, vibrating through the splintered floorboards of the tower. Evander knelt in the sand-choked library, hands trembling as he clutched the satchel to his chest. The hourglass inside pulsed in time with the monstrous heartbeat of the hollow. All around him, the hollow men waited. Maeva, stitched and hollow, waited. The broken books whispered in frantic tongues, urging, pleading, condemning. "Turn it, turn it, turn it." Evander's body rebelled. His hands shook violently. His lungs fought for air, thickened with grit and sorrow. He knew the truth now. One more turn wouldn't save anyone. It wouldn't fix Graven Hollow. It wouldn't bring Leah back. But it would buy him a single thing he still craved in his rotten, dying heart. A chance to remember. One clear memory. One fragment of love. One spark of who he had been before the hollow started eating him grain by grain. He gritted his teeth. He pulled the hourglass from the satchel. It pulsed against his skin like a living heart. The glass gleamed, flawless, hungry, waiting. His reflection stared back at him, rippling in the polished surface. Hollow-eyed, bleeding sand from a dozen tiny fractures across his face and hands. He thought of Leah's laugh, now distant and faded, of Jonas's crooked grin, already dissolving into dust, of his own name, slipping further from his grasp with every breath. He had no choice. He flipped the hourglass. The world shattered. The floor cracked beneath him, great slabs of stone sinking into the sand as the very foundation of the tower buckled. The library shelves collapsed inward, vomiting books that dissolved into ash mid-air. The hollow men screamed, a terrible, wordless sound, and surged forward. Maeva fell to her knees, mouth gaping, black thread snapping and curling from her lips. Like smoke, Evander was thrown backward by a blast of invisible force. He landed hard, stars exploding behind his eyes. And then silence. Utter, complete silence. He opened his eyes slowly. The library was gone. The tower was gone. The hollow men were gone. He stood in a vast, endless desert of crimson sand, under a sky of grinding black gears that stretched to infinity. The only sound was the slow, methodical drip of sand from the hourglass he held. Before him, something rose from the sand. A figure. Leah. Not twisted or broken now. Not stitched or hollow, whole, alive. She wore the white dress she had died in, the one she had chosen for the wedding they never reached. Her face shone with tears. "Evander," she whispered. His heart broke all over again. He ran to her, dropping the hourglass, forgetting everything but the impossible, unbearable miracle of her voice, her smile, her outstretched hands. He collapsed into her arms, sobbing. She held him tightly, pressing her face into his shoulder. For a moment, just one, the world was right, whole. But then he felt it, the sand pouring from her eyes, from her mouth, from the seams opening along her spine. He pulled back in horror. Leah smiled sadly. "You can remember me," she said, "or you can escape." Sand poured from her wounds now, swirling around them in choking clouds. "You can't have both." Evander shook his head violently. "No," he croaked. "Please, no." The hourglass pulsed on the ground, faster and faster. The sands beneath his feet shifted, dragging him downward. Leah reached out for him, her hand disintegrating into dust even as she moved. "Choose," she whispered. He tried to grab her, tried to hold on, but his fingers closed around nothing but sand. She dissolved before his eyes, 1,000 tiny grains spinning upward into the grinding sky. Evander screamed, reaching into the storm, but it was too late. She was gone. Again. Forever. The desert cracked apart beneath him. He fell, tumbling through blackness shot through with crimson veins, the ticking swallowing every sound. When he hit the ground, it was back inside the tower. But it wasn't the same. The walls had collapsed inward. The great black hourglass above the atrium trembled on its pedestal, bleeding rivers of sand into the street outside. The hollow men were no longer human shapes. They had fused together, a seething mass of writhing bodies stitched with clockwork veins and screaming mouths. Evander lay gasping amid the ruins, the hourglass clutched to his chest. The third turn had brought him a memory, a single fleeting touch of Leah's voice, her arms, her sorrow, and it had cost him everything else, his name, his past. His chance at undoing the curse. He was hollow now, a man-shaped vessel for the hollow's endless hunger. He staggered to his feet. The tower moaned around him, shifting, crumbling. Outside, the mist roiled higher, swallowing the sky, swallowing the town. Evander stumbled forward, coughing sand, half-blind, his body fracturing along invisible seams. He had one chance left, one final choice. But the ticking inside his chest was almost spent. The sands of him were almost gone. And the hollow waited, patient and eternal, for the last grain to fall. Evander stumbled through the ruins of the tower, dragging the satchel behind him. The world bled around him, walls sagging, stone liquefying into rivers of crimson sand. The sky above tore itself open with each tick of the unseen clocks, gears grinding in vast, screaming convulsions. The town was gone. Graven Hollow had collapsed into a spiraling desert of ruins, a sinking graveyard of drowned memories. Streetlights bent toward the ground like mourners. Church spires jutted at impossible angles. Shops and homes melted into dunes of dust, their names already forgotten. Evander moved through it all like a man wading through his own grave. Each step left a footprint that filled with sand before he lifted his foot. The hourglass throbbed inside the satchel, heavier now, hotter, as though it burned with his remaining time. Ahead, shapes moved. Evander froze, shielding his sand-blurred eyes. At first he thought it was more hollow men, another chorus of empty, faceless things ready to absorb what little of him remained. But as they came closer, he recognized them. Jonas, Maver, others, faces from his past he couldn't fully name anymore. Blurred by time, crumbling like statues left too long in the rain, they moved toward him in slow, jerking strides. Not hollow men, Not yet. Something worse. Remnants. They wore their old bodies like rotted clothing, stitched together with black wire, and bleeding red sand from their mouths, their eyes, the seams of their memories. Jonas's voice cracked across the wasteland. You turned it again. Evander shook his head weakly. I had to, he rasped. I had no choice. Maeva's broken face twisted into something that might have been pity or hatred. There's always a choice, she said. You just didn't want to make it. The remnants circled him, dragging chains of sand that fused to the ground behind them. Locking him in place, Evander clutched the satchel to his chest. I'm sorry, he whispered. A low rumble shook the ground. The great black hourglass that towered above the ruins trembled violently, rivers of shadow pouring from its cracked seams. The sand swirled upward into the mist, birthing new shapes. Faces. He knew faces he would never know, all devoured by the endless hunger. The hollow was waking fully now. Jonas stepped closer. You don't get to be sorry, he said. You get to be forgotten. He raised a hand, and with it the sands around Evander rose like tendrils, slithering up his legs, binding his arms, seeking his mouth and eyes. Evander struggled, gasping. The hourglass in the satchel pulsed desperately, a heartbeat matching the ticking inside his ears. Jonas leaned down, his face inches from Evander's. I would have died for you, he whispered. The sand tightened around Evander's chest. I would have burned Graven Hollow to the ground for you, Jonas said. Evander's vision blurred. The remnants pressed closer, their bodies weeping endless streams of sand that stained the air. But you, Jonas said softly, almost kindly, you just let us drown. He drove his hand into Evander's chest. Not flesh and blood, but a blackened shard of clockwork, piercing between Evander's ribs. Pain exploded through him, a raw animal. Sound tearing from his throat. Sand poured from the wound, faster than blood, staining the ground beneath him. The remnants whispered in unison, one turn, one life, one memory, one death. Evander felt himself splitting apart. Fractures racing through his mind, his body, his soul. He saw flashes. Leah smiling in a sunlit field. Jonas laughing over spilled beer. His mother's face reading to him by candlelight. His father's rough hand on his shoulder. Himself standing before the shattered clock, deciding whether to turn the hourglass for the first time. Memories burned away in an instant. Gone. Gone. Gone, he screamed. The remnants shrieked in triumph, their bodies unraveling into streams of black sand that coiled upward into the broken sky. Evander collapsed to his knees, the wound in his chest gaping, pouring the last of him into the hollow. The hourglass in the satchel cracked down the center. Crimson light spilled from the fracture, staining the ground. Above, the black hourglass began to tilt, the final grains of shadow spilling out, dissolving. The last anchors of the world. Evander gritted his teeth, forcing himself upright. He wasn't dead, not yet. He staggered forward, dragging the satchel toward the base of the great hourglass, toward the last choice he would ever make. The remnants faded behind him, blown away like ashes on a dead wind. He alone remained, bleeding sand with every step. Each breath a battle, each heartbeat a fading drumbeat against inevitable oblivion. At the base of the hourglass, he stopped. It towered over him, pulsing, grinding, feeding. The sigil burned again across his palm, bright, furious. Evander placed his hand against the cracked surface. The hourglass shuddered. Through the rupture, he glimpsed faces trapped within, billions of them, souls caught mid-scream, mid-prayer, mid-song, swirling forever in an endless storm of lost time. He felt their pull, their need, their rage. He could join them now. He could let go, become part of the hollow forever. But somewhere deep inside, in the dying embers of what had once been Evander Price, a spark flared. Not yet. He clenched his bleeding fist. Above him, The black gears of the hollow sky ground faster, desperate to finish him. Evander drew a final, ragged breath and made his choice. The hollow raged around him. Winds of sand and time whipped across the ruins, tearing loose the remnants of graven hollow and carrying them into the churning black sky. Trees bent and snapped, houses caved in on themselves, roads crumbled into rivers of dust. Evander staggered against the pull of it all, his blood now little more than fine crimson sand, leaking steadily from the wound Jonas had left. Every heartbeat came slower, every breath shallower. The satchel hung limp at his side, the hourglass inside flickering with dying light, barely pulsing anymore. He stumbled forward to the base of the great black hourglass. Above him, the monstrous gears ground and screamed, the sky a collapsing machine gnashing its teeth. He pressed his palm, marked with the burning sigil, against the cracked glass. It pulsed beneath his touch, sensing his weakness, his nearness to surrender. The hourglass offered him a way out, one last turn, one last sacrifice. He could feel it, vibrating through his bones, the terrible promise that if he turned it now, he could erase all memory of Leah, of Jonas, of everything he had lost. A final, clean slate. Freedom. At the cost of forgetting why he had ever cared in the first place. Tears burned his eyes. Evander slid down to his knees, the sand rising to claim him. The hollow was not just feeding on memories anymore. It was rewriting reality itself. Pieces of him flickered in and out of existence. His hands blurred, sometimes too many fingers, sometimes none at all. His thoughts split and twisted. Memories of places he had never been, faces he had never seen, flooding his mind like a river bursting its banks. He clutched the hourglass with both hands now. Its surface was fever hot, pulsing like a living heart, veins of blackness crawling across the glass. He heard them whispering. Leah's voice, soft and pleading. Turn it. Forget the pain. Jonas's voice, bitter and broken. Turn it. Forget me. Maeva's voice, hollow and thin. Turn it. Forget yourself. Evander sobbed. He wanted to. God, he wanted to. Anything to end the hollow ache inside him. But deep beneath, the grief, beneath the horror, beneath the hunger of the hollow, a single thought held fast. If I forget them, I lose everything that made me human, and if he surrendered, the hollow would not stop with him. It would spill outward into other towns, other lives, consuming the world grain by grain, memory by memory. He pressed his forehead against the hourglass. I won't forget, he whispered. The hourglass quivered violently. Cracks raced across its surface like spider webs, leaking red sand into the wind. The ground beneath Evander's knees collapsed, sinking him waist deep into a pit of shifting dust. He clung to the hourglass, feeling his body unravel, skin sloughing into sand, bones hollowing out, memories snapping away one by one like brittle twigs. He clung harder. Above, the great gears shuddered and slowed. The hollow screamed, not a sound but a deep, bone-vibrating groan that reverberated through the earth, the sky, the failing remains of time itself. He squeezed the hourglass, forced all his broken will into it, and with a final furious cry, he fractured it. The glass shattered inward, imploding with a wet, sickening crunch. The sand within exploded outward, a wave of red mist that tore through the hollow, ripping apart the stitched remnants of the town, dissolving the hollow men into shrieking eddies of dust. The tower screamed and crumbled. The sky peeled back, revealing a black void shot through with dying stars. Evander fell backward into the pit, swallowed by darkness. He expected death, expected the final erasure, but instead he landed on cold, wet stone. The mist thinned, the storm subsided, and for a moment there was only silence. He opened his eyes. Grave and hollow stood around him, not whole but recognizable. Ruined houses leaned drunkenly against scorched trees. The streets were broken, flooded with shallow pools of water reflecting the blood-red sky. But the hollow was no longer alive. It was empty, dead, a corpse of a place. Evander sat up slowly, every bone in his body aching. He touched his face. No blood, no sand, only scars, deep black lines etched into his flesh, faintly warm beneath his fingertips. The hourglass was gone, shattered, erased. But so, he realized with a hollow ache, were pieces of himself. He could no longer remember the color of Leah's eyes, could no longer hear the sound of Jonas's laughter, could barely recall Maeva's sharp voice and wry smile. Only echoes remained, faint impressions pressed into the ruined parchment of his mind, a terrible wound, a hole where love and guilt had once lived. He rose unsteadily, looking out over the drowned remains of Grave and Hollow. He had survived, at a cost. His name still hung somewhere inside him, his purpose. But the wound that binds, would never heal. It was part of him now. The hollow had marked him forever, and somewhere, far below the cracked earth, in the ruins of the shattered tower, grains of crimson sand still stirred faintly in the dark, waiting, whispering. The ruins of Grave and Hollow lay still, but the air pulsed with a breath that wasn't his. Evander moved through the broken streets like a ghost, his boots splashing in the shallow black pools that mirrored a sky split with dying red veins. Every building sagged inward, their skeletal frames reaching for him like broken fingers. The hollow wasn't dead. It was sleeping, waiting. A low vibration threaded through the earth, a sound beneath hearing, a pull deep in his marrow. He followed, it not by choice, there was no choice anymore, but by inevitability. At the edge of town, where once the cliffs rose above the churning sea, a new structure clawed its way into the bleeding sky. The Tower of Never. It wasn't made of stone or wood or metal. It was constructed from memory, from regret. The walls writhed with shifting images, faces Evander could no longer fully recall, places he had loved and lost, moments he had traded away for survival. They flashed and twisted, each glimpse cutting deeper than any blade. The tower had no door, only a yawning black maw at its base, breathing in the dead wind. Evander stepped inside. Darkness swallowed him. The air inside was colder than the grave. The floor beneath his feet felt soft, shifting. Ash, not stone. The walls rippled and moaned, stitched together from time itself, bleeding slow streams of crimson dust. Each step forward dragged at him, trying to suck him down. He stumbled through a corridor that folded and unfolded around him, staircases spiraling upward and downward at once, impossible geometries bending his perception. There were no clocks here, no ticking, only the low, endless grinding of forgotten things turning in the dark. A voice echoed ahead, thin, broken, almost familiar. Evander. He froze. It was Leah's voice. Spun, scanning the shadows, but saw only shapes writhing behind thin walls of translucent sand. Again. Evander. You left me. The voice was wrong, distorted, threaded through with the hollow's hunger. He pressed on. Corridors narrowed, walls closing in, squeezing him through claustrophobic passages where the air was thick with the scent of burnt paper and blood. The Tower of Never shifted as he moved. Memories surfaced along the walls, projected like ghostly film reels. There he was, a boy hiding under the kitchen table during a storm, his mother calling for him. There he was again, laughing with Jonas on the beach, their feet kicking up spray. There was Leah, smiling shyly across the table on their first clumsy date. Evander reached for her. The image peeled away, melting into sand. A cruel reminder. Nothing he touched would ever stay. The tower whispered as he climbed deeper into its guts. Turn again. Forget again. Save yourself. He shook his head violently. He would not turn it again. He had made his choice. At last, the passage opened into a massive chamber, the heart of the tower. It was a cathedral of ruin, twisted columns made from fused bones, and gears, an altar of shattered hourglasses, and above it all, suspended in mid-air, a vortex of sand spiraling into a singularity of pure darkness. At the base of the altar stood someone, Dr. Ellis Rowe, or what was left of him. His body was twisted, half human, half machine, gears meshed into his flesh, his eyes glowing dimly with the hollow's light. Red sand spilled from the cracks in his skin. He turned slowly to face Evander, his voice a grinding blend of sorrow and inevitability. "You came," Rowe rasped. Evander staggered forward, chest burning. "What is this place?" he croaked. Rowe smiled, bitterly. "The place where time ends, the place where bargains are paid." He gestured to the altar. "You must finish it, Evander. Bind the hollow, seal it away." Evander shook his head. "I don't know how," he said. "I don't—" "You do," Rowe interrupted. "You've carried the mark. You've fed it with your life, your love, your soul. Now you must starve it." Evander's vision blurred. Starve it, at the cost of everything he had left. Rowe limped closer. "Place your wound," he said, tapping Evander's bleeding chest. "Against the heart. Give it all you are, all you were." Evander staggered back. "If I do, I'll disappear," he whispered. Rowe nodded once. "You'll be forgotten, even by yourself." The hollow churned above them, vast and starving. Sand fell in great sheets now, erasing the floor beneath his feet, erasing the world. He looked at Rowe, at the altar, at the endless black vortex swallowing the last lights of Graven Hollow. Evander closed his eyes. He thought, barely, of Leah's smile, already slipping through his grasp, of Jonas's laugh, of his mother's lullabies, all fading, all fading. Tears slid down his cracked cheeks. He took the final steps toward the altar. The wound on his chest opened wider, bleeding thick, slow streams of crimson sand. He placed his broken hands on the jagged surface of the shattered hourglasses. The heart of the tower pulsed once, twice, and Evander felt himself unravel, not just his body, his memories, his soul. Every laugh, every touch, every sorrow, siphoned into the hollow, feeding it one last time. But this time, it was not enough to sustain it. It collapsed inward, howling, clawing at the dying edges of existence. The tower of never shuddered and screamed. Walls cracked. The sky fell. The hollow, denied, shriveled into itself, collapsing into a single speck of black sand that hung weightless for a moment, then winked out. Silence. True, perfect silence. Evander fell backward, the last of his strength bleeding away. The ruins of the tower dissolved into nothingness around him. The hollow was gone, sealed, starved, but so was he. He lay on the cooling stone, blinking up at a sky slowly brightening into a soft, pale dawn. His name danced at the edge of thought. His memories drifted like smoke, and in the final, fading breath of who he had been, Evander smiled. Not because he remembered, but because somehow he knew he had chosen rightly. The tower of never crumbled into. The earth and Graven Hollow was silent. The sky bled into a dull, washed-out grey. Evander lay unmoving on the cracked earth where the Tower of Never had stood, his chest rising and falling in shallow, uncertain breaths. His mind was a cracked mirror, fractured memories, ghost fragments, and blank spaces stretched across the inside of his skull. Who was he? He tried to summon the thought, but it slipped through his grasp like smoke through fingers. Around him, Graven Hollow was nothing but ruins, skeletal frames of houses, twisted lampposts, pools of stagnant water reflecting a dying world. And yet, the hollow wasn't pulling at him anymore. The constant ticking that had haunted his every thought was gone. The hourglass was gone, and for the first time in what might have been years or minutes, there was stillness, a mercy, perhaps. Footsteps crunched nearby. Evander forced himself to sit up, his joints grinding like ancient machinery. A figure emerged from the mist. At first he thought it was another remnant, another half-formed ghost dragged from memory. But as the figure drew closer, Evander recognized him. Dr. Ellis Rowe, still alive, still broken, but different. Rowe's skin no longer crawled with gears or leaked sand. His body, though aged and frail, seemed whole again. His eyes, once dim and corrupted, now shone with terrible clarity. Rowe knelt beside him. "You did it," the old man said, voice low, almost reverent. Evander opened his mouth, but no words came. Rowe smiled sadly. "You saved them. Saved yourself. Saved the hollow from itself." Evander swallowed against the dryness in his throat. "Then why?" His voice cracked. "Why do I feel like I'm still sinking?" Rowe's smile faltered. And then came the twist, the revelation that twisted the knife deeper. "You didn't destroy the hollow," Rowe said softly. "You became it." Evander's vision blurred. "What?" he whispered. Rowe placed a gentle, almost fatherly hand on his shoulder. "You sealed it inside yourself," he said. "There was no other way." He gestured to the broken landscape around them. This place, Graven Hollow, it needed a vessel, a keeper, someone strong enough to carry the wound, someone desperate enough to bear it willingly. Evander's mind reeled. The sacrifice had not been to end the hollow. It had been to contain it, in himself, the final jailer, the eternal prisoner. Rowe's voice dropped to a whisper. "You're the new timekeeper, Evander." Evander shook his head violently. "No," he gasped. I didn't agree." "You agreed when you turned it the third time," Rowe said gently. "You agreed when you chose memory over oblivion. Each turn was a signature, each loss a binding." The ground shuddered faintly beneath them, as if affirming Rowe's words. Evander looked down at his hands. Cracks had begun to form along his skin, faint black lines spider-webbing across his palms, up his wrists. Inside the fractures, he could see glimpses of red sand swirling slowly, endlessly. He was becoming part of the mechanism. The gears of the hollow turned inside him now. Tears slid down his face. Not just for himself, but for all he had. Tried and failed to save, for Leah, for Jonas, for Maver, for all the forgotten souls buried beneath Graven Hollow's bones. "You said I had a choice," Evander rasped, fury and sorrow blurring together. Rowe nodded solemnly. "You did, and you chose mercy." He helped Evander to his feet. Around them, the mist began to thin. New houses, whole and clean, rose from the ground. Children's laughter echoed faintly on the breeze. The town was rebuilding itself, not the same Graven Hollow, but something else. Something new. Rebirth. Because Evander had taken the wound into himself. Because he had accepted the endless pain so that others could live and forget. Rowe looked at him with quiet admiration. "You'll fade from them," he said. "No one will remember you. Not by name, not by face, but the hollow will know." He stepped back, mist curling around his ankles. "And when the hourglass cracks again, because it always does, you'll be here, waiting." Evander swayed, the weight of the truth crashing down on him. He wasn't a man anymore. He was a clock without hands, a memory without an owner. The silent heartbeat of a wound too vast to heal. The tower of never was gone, but the tower inside him would stand forever. Rose's figure blurred, fading into the rising mist. Evander turned slowly, facing the remnants of the new town, shadows of people he would never meet, lives he would never touch, but lives saved nonetheless. He took a single step forward. The ground beneath him did not crumble. Fire mist did not devour him. The hollow, at least for now, was silent within him, but deep in his soul he heard it, the faint, patient ticking, waiting, always waiting. The mist parted reluctantly as Evander walked. Each footstep left no mark on the ground. It was as if he was already half forgotten, a ghost treading through a world that no longer knew his name. The new graven hollow rose around him. Fresh houses, clean streets, blooming gardens. But it all felt paper-thin, a dream stitched hastily over the bones of the old, rotting town. The air buzzed faintly, as though the hollow itself strained against the skin of its rebirth. Evander moved through it like a wound that refused to close. Children laughed somewhere beyond the bend of a newly paved street. A shopkeeper whistled as he wiped dust from his storefront window. Life had returned on the surface. But Evander felt the truth thrumming underfoot. The hollow wasn't healed. It was bound, barely, and the chains were made from him. Each step grew heavier. The red sand leaked from the cracks along his fingers, seeping into the earth unnoticed, like forgotten blood staining the roots of a tree. He found himself standing at the town square. The fountain there had once been a gaping sinkhole that swallowed whole buildings during the worst of the hollow's hunger. Now it bubbled cheerfully, its crystal-clear water sparkling in the pale morning light. Families gathered nearby, smiling, oblivious. Evander watched them, a hollow ache gnawing at his insides. He remembered none of their faces, and they would never know his. Something shifted behind him. He turned and saw Maeva Quinn, or what was left of her. She stood near the edge of the square, her body wrapped in a long coat, a tattered scarf hiding the stitches that traced her throat and jawline. Her eyes found his immediately. Not recognition, not warmth, something colder, harder. Evander approached cautiously. "Maeva," he said, his voice a rasp. She said nothing at first, only watched him with that hollow stare. Then, very slowly, she peeled back the scarf around her neck. The black stitches yawned open. From within the seam, a trickle of red sand spilled. Onto the cobblestones, Evander staggered back. "No," he whispered. I sealed it. Maeva smiled faintly, an expression without joy. "You sealed your hollow," she said softly, her voice a brittle whisper like snapping reeds. "Not mine." The world tilted. Evander swayed, fighting nausea. Maeva stepped closer, the sand bleeding heavier now from the wounds running under her skin. "They made more than one," she said. "The timekeeper. He couldn't contain it all in one vessel. He split it." She pressed a shaking hand to her chest. "Part of it lived in me, all this time, waiting." Evander's vision blurred. You flipped it too," he realized. "Long before I found the hourglass." Maeva nodded. "Long before you were even born." The families at the fountain laughed, their sounds distant, warped. The mist thickened again. At the edges of the square, coiling like unseen fingers, Maeva leaned close. "You starved your half," she whispered, "but mine is still hungry." The fountain water darkened, first pink, then red. Children's laughter twisted into screams. The families turned, faces already melting into blurred, eyeless masks. The hollow was awakening again, through her, through the wound that had never fully healed. Evander staggered back, clutching at the crack widening across his chest. The hollow within him roared, not in anger, but in recognition. It knew. It had only been half a victory. Maeva's face cracked open along old seams, her skin crumbling into bands of sand and broken clockwork. She was not Maeva anymore. She was a keeper too, a failed one. She reached toward him with a trembling, disjointed hand. "Come with me," she said. "Bind the rest. Finish what you started." Evander shook his head violently. "No," he rasped. "I can't." "You must," she said, her voice cracking with desperation and hunger. "Or it will spread again. It will find others. It will drown this town all over." The mist coiled tighter, dimming the sunlight. The town square shifted, flickering between the clean, bright streets and the drowned, sand-choked ruins Evander remembered. He could feel it. The breach widening, the seal slipping. The children began to dissolve into dust, their laughter swallowed by the rising roar of the hollow's hunger. Evander dropped to his knees, fists pounding the broken stones. He was not strong enough. Not again. Not this time. Maeva knelt in front of him, her hands cupping his broken face. "You must," she whispered again, "or all of it was for nothing." He looked into her eyes and saw, flickering there beneath the ruined surface, a glimmer of what she had been before, a woman desperate to protect her home, willing to sacrifice herself again and again, failing but never giving up. The same terrible, unbearable mercy he had chosen. He closed his eyes and accepted the weight. The hollow roared triumphantly, surging into him sand and sorrow, and all the broken clocks of a dying world. Maeva crumbled into dust in his arms, her final breath spilling into the mist. The town square snapped fully back into the drowned, rotted wasteland. The rebuilt hollow collapsed around him, walls and windows and sky folding inward like a dying flower. Evander stood alone at the center of the storm, the last keeper, the true vessel. And as the sands devoured the world once more, he felt nothing. No fear, no grief, only the slow, patient ticking, always ticking, waiting. The world crumbled around him. Evander stood alone at the center of a collapsing storm, the ruins of Graven Hollow spiraling into the mist like ash drawn into a vortex. Houses folded inward, streets split and twisted, trees wept streams of crimson, sand from gaping wounds. Above, the sky cracked wide, exposing a black chasm where dying stars spun backward, unwinding into oblivion. Evander's body was barely holding together. The fractures raced across his skin, deep black fissures leaking fine, streams of red sand with every breath, every heartbeat. His bones ached with the hollow's hunger. His mind fluttered at the edge of a void. The hourglass hung in the air before him, whole again, beckoning. Its crimson sand swirled slowly, thick and heavy, each grain a memory, a life, a sacrifice. One last turn. That was the offer. Evander staggered forward. The hourglass spun lazily, reflecting distorted images across its surface. Leah smiling through a curtain of rain, Jonas laughing drunkenly at some half-forgotten joke, Maeva reading by the cracked light of a failing lantern. Ghosts, all of them, all devoured by his choices. He reached for the hourglass. His fingertips brushed the glass, and the hollow flooded his mind with visions. If he turned it again, he would be granted one final gift, the chance to rebuild Graven Hollow, to restore the memories he had lost, to bring back Leah, Jonas, Maeva. But the cost, he would lose himself, completely. No memory, no soul, no spark. He would become a living conduit, an empty vessel for the hollow to shape as it pleased, a silent warden, an eternal sacrifice. The hourglass pulsed against his hand, the choice pressed down on him, vast and crushing. In the shifting mist around him, shadow forms gathered, the faces of the town, twisted and weeping. reaching for him with desperate hands. "Turn it," they whispered. "Turn it and save us. Turn it and forget. Turn it and end your pain." Evander closed his eyes. The sand burned beneath his skin. The wound in his chest yawned open wider, bleeding memories in long, slow streams. He thought, if only for a heartbeat, of choosing to forget, of letting go, of flipping the hourglass one final time and surrendering the burden he could no longer carry. Would it be so wrong? After all he had lost, after all he had become? He opened his eyes. The hourglass floated patiently before him, silent and knowing, waiting. Evander's hands shook violently. He thought of Leah, of how much he had loved her, of how much he had already forgotten. He thought of Jonas and Maeva and the countless nameless faces he had failed to save. And he thought of the hollow, of the endless gnawing hunger that had tricked him into binding himself to it. If he turned it now, there would be no fight left. No hope. The hollow would win, not with rage, not with blood, but with mercy. It would swallow him kindly, painlessly, erasing the last light he carried. He lowered his hand. "No," he whispered. The hourglass shivered. The shadows around him shrieked. The mist closed tighter, writhing with fury. Evander stumbled back, fighting the pull of the hollow's promise. The ground cracked beneath his feet, vast chasms opening into bottomless pits lined with shattered reflections of his former life. The hollow roared, a soundless scream that tore at the edges of reality. The hourglass flashed, flooding his mind with visions of all he could reclaim, all he could have, if he would just give in. But he held firm. He turned away from the hourglass. The hollow's pull clawed at him, tearing strips of sand and memory from his body as he staggered toward the center of the storm. He would not flip it again. He would not surrender. He would carry the wound. He would carry the pain. Because some things were worth remembering, even when they hurt, especially when they hurt. The hourglass cracked in the air behind him, fissures racing across its surface. The hollow wailed. The ruins of Graven Hollow twisted and dissolved, sucked into the collapsing hourglass, compressed into a single grain of crimson dust. Evander reached the center of the storm. A pillar of shifting sand towered before him, taller than mountains, broader than oceans, the true heart of the hollow, the source of all its endless hunger. It pulsed in time with his dying heartbeat. He raised his broken, bleeding hands and plunged them into the pillar. The sand screamed, writhing around him, trying to force its way into his mouth, his eyes, his heart. He gritted his teeth and pressed deeper. The sand burned his skin to ash, tore his memories apart like brittle paper, shredded every name and face he clung to. But he held on. Deeper, deeper, until he touched the core, a single, trembling spark of light buried within the endless black sand. The memory of what had been lost, the truth the hollow had tried to bury. He seized it, and the world exploded. Light and shadow tore through the ruins, through the mist, through the broken bones of Graven Hollow. The hollow howled, a death cry that shook the stars from the sky. The hourglass above them shattered into dust. The ground fractured, collapsing inward. The mist burned away, and Evander fell through silence, through darkness, through memory, towards something he could not yet see. Something waiting at the end of all things, a reckoning, a choice, a final breath. The fall lasted forever, or perhaps it lasted only a second. There was no time anymore, not as Evander had once known it. Only the endless feeling of being unwound, his body unraveling strand by strand into the void left behind by the hollow's collapse. And yet somehow he landed. Hard. The ground beneath him was not made of earth or stone or sand. It was made of memory, fragments of broken lives, shattered promises, forgotten laughter, all compressed into a surface that shifted and groaned. Beneath his weight, Evander pushed himself upright, gasping. The world around him had changed again. Above him, the sky was a gaping wound, torn open to reveal a swirling mass of gears and stars grinding against each other in slow, titanic agony. The air smelled of scorched paper and rusted blood. He stood on an endless plain stretching in all directions, dotted with towering skeletal structures, fossilized remains of clocks, their faces broken, their hands spinning wildly. At the center of the plain rose a new structure, a colossal hourglass, far larger than anything he had seen before. Its glass was cracked, leaking thick streams of crimson mist into the sky. And inside the swirling sands, something moved, something waking, something monstrous. Evander staggered toward it, each step sending ripples across the ground. The hourglass groaned under its own impossible weight, the cracks spreading wider with each heaving breath of the hollow. He knew, deep in the hollow marrow of his bones, what was about to happen. The entity at the heart of all this, the true face of the hollow, was about to be born, and he would have to face it, even if there was nothing left of him to offer. The hourglass gave a great shuddering crack. The sands inside spun faster, whirling into a cyclone of blood and ash. Shapes flickered within. 1,000 faces screaming in silence, 1,000 hands clawing against the inner walls, desperate to escape. Evander stumbled closer. The glass shattered, a shockwave of raw sound, and memory ripped outward, hurling him to the ground. He covered his ears, but it was no use. The sound wasn't heard by the ears, but by the soul. It poured into him, filling every crack and fracture, swelling inside his head until he thought it would burst. The entity stepped free. It had no single shape. It was all things lost and broken. It shifted with every breath. A woman with Leah's hair, but no face. A man with Jonas's broken smile stitched across a bleeding clock face. A child whose eyes had been replaced by spinning gears. 1,000 fractured reflections of everyone Evander had ever loved, hated, forgotten. It towered above, him hunched and wheezing, dragging chains of melted time from its splintered limbs. Its voice was a grinding, endless chord. "Keep her," it said. "You fed us, you carried us, you made yourself the wound." Evander rose to his knees, battered and bleeding. "You're not them," he whispered hoarsely. "You're what was left after I lost them." The entity shuddered, its 1,000 faces distorting into howling mouths. "We are what you chose to forget," it said. "We are what remains when love fails, when memory fails, when time devours all things." The ground cracked around Evander, rivers of sand gushing upward into the storming sky. The entity lumbered forward, its massive hands dragging razors of shattered clock hands across the plain. "Turn again," it crooned. "Turn and join us. Feed the hollow with your last breath. Become whole." Evander struggled to stand. The air was thick, every inhale clawing through the torn seams of his lungs. But he stood. Somehow, he stood. He faced the entity. "I won't," he said. The entity laughed, 1,000 mouths, 1,000 weeping songs of despair. "You will." The sand twisted into forms, Leah reaching out, begging, Jonas screaming, Maeva pleading with hollow eyes. They circled him, clawing at his clothes, his skin, his mind. He clutched his head, stumbling backward. "You can't," he gasped. "You can't make me." The entity loomed over him, blocking out the broken sky. It leaned down, its voice a whisper of a dying world. "You already have, Keeper. You carry us inside you. There is no you anymore, only us." Evander fell to one knee, the sand swallowing him to the waist. The faces around him twisted and cried. He thought of Leah again, of that first night when she had laughed so hard she cried, spilling wine down her dress, insisting it was the best night of her life. He thought of Jonas, breaking a nose to defend him in a bar fight, grinning through bloodied teeth. He thought of Maeva, handing him an old map with shaking hands, her voice cracking as she said, "I hope you find your way." Fragments, only fragments, but they were his. Evander looked up at the entity, looked into the whirling pit of lost time and grief and rage, and he smiled, a broken, defiant smile. "I remember," he said. The entity recoiled, the sandstorm faltered, the faces blurred. Evander pressed a hand against his cracked chest, where the faintest glow pulsed, not from the hollow, not from the wound, from memory, real, stubborn memory. Love, loss, choice. The entity roared, a noise that shook the foundations of the dying world. It lunged. Evander stood firm. The sand peeled away from him, shrieking. The faces screamed and dissolved. The sky tore open in a flood of white light. The entity struck him and shattered, exploding into a maelstrom of crimson dust and broken gears. Evander was flung backward into the light. The world collapsed. Inward, folding and folding until it became a single point of burning, blinding brightness. And then, silence. True silence. Evander floated in the endless white, weightless, whole, broken, hollow, human. The hollow was gone, or at least it was no longer hungry. He had fed it the only thing it couldn't consume. The truth of who he was, even broken, even grieving, even forgotten, still himself. Still Evander Price, as the white light faded, a new world unfurled before him. One still scarred, still healing, but alive. And for the first time in what felt like forever, he took a breath not stolen by sand, a breath that was his own. The new world settled slowly, as if reluctant to reveal itself. Evander stood at the edge of a field where mist clung low to the ground, breathing in soft, slow waves. Strange trees rose from the soil, withered and pale, their branches adorned, with broken watch faces that swayed in an invisible wind. There were no clocks ticking anymore, only the steady, endless hum of time moving forward without chains. He took a step. The earth was solid beneath his feet, but it had the texture of something long submerged in dreams, half real, half remembered. Before him stood a house, small, lonely, old. It leaned slightly to one side, its weathered wood grey with age, its roof slumping under the weight of countless storms. Ivy crawled across its windows, and a cracked brass weather vane spun lazily atop its sagging roof. The house of hollow time. He knew it instinctively. This place was not built of timber or stone. It was built from the forgotten minutes, the small, precious moments lost to sorrow, to grief, to fear. It waited for him. The front door hung slightly ajar, creaking faintly. Evander approached, the wound in his chest pulsing dully with every step. His body was no longer bleeding sand, but the scars remained, a latticework of dark, aching lines across his skin, burning faintly under his coat. He pushed open the door. Inside, the house smelled of rain and dust. The walls were lined with empty picture frames, hundreds of them. Some were ornate, gilded and grand, others simple, chipped, almost childlike. But all of them were empty. No faces, no memories, just hollow spaces where lives used to live. A heavy grandfather clock stood in the hall, its pendulum motionless. Its face was blank, no numbers, no hands. Evander moved through the rooms. A kitchen, where no meals had ever been cooked. A parlor with a fireplace that had never burned. a staircase leading up to a second floor that sagged dangerously under its own weight. The house was an echo, a mausoleum for the moments he had sacrificed. On a battered table near the fireplace, he found a small object, an hourglass, not cracked, not bleeding, whole. The sand inside it was silver, gleaming faintly in the dim light. It was tiny, fragile, and it was still. No movement, no ticking. Evander picked it up carefully. The glass was cold under his fingertips. He held it up, inspecting it. There was a tiny inscription along the metal frame, so small he almost missed it. 4 words carved in delicate, desperate strokes. Remember what was lost. He clutched the hourglass to his chest, heart hammering. This was his burden now, not to turn the glass, not to change fate, but simply to remember, to carry the memories no one else would, the laughter, the weeping, the promises, the betrayals, the love, all of it, forever. He set the hourglass down on the mantel above the fireplace. It sat there, a silent witness to all that had passed. Outside, the mist rolled in thicker, swallowing the field, the trees, the ruined sky. Evander sat down heavily in the lone armchair by the hearth. He leaned back, closing his eyes, and listened. No ticking, no chains, no screams, only the sound of a world beginning again, one breath at a time. But he could still feel them. Jonas, Maeva, Leah. They moved through the mist, shadows of the memories he refused to surrender. He smiled through the tears sliding silently down his cheeks. He had kept his promise. He had remembered. And because he remembered, the hollow could not claim them completely. The floorboards creaked gently under the weight of unseen footsteps. A faint, ghostly laugh, a child's, high and sweet, drifted through the house. For a brief, aching moment, Evander allowed himself to believe it was real, that the House of Hollow Time was not just a tomb, but a cradle, a place where forgotten things could rest, and where the broken parts of him could finally be at peace. He opened his eyes. The mist had thickened at the windows, swirling into shapes he could almost recognize. Hands, faces, memories. They gathered at the edges of the house, not menacingly, but curiously, as if waiting for him to tell their stories, waiting for him to keep the lights burning, waiting to be remembered. Evander leaned forward and lit a single candle on the mantel. Its flame flickered and swayed, casting long shadows across the empty frames. One by one, faint images began to appear inside them. Leah laughing, Jonas grinning with bloodied teeth, Maeva scribbling frantically in a crumbling ledger. Others he did not recognize, strangers he had never met but somehow knew, souls the Hollow had consumed long before he was born. They smiled at him, thanked him, forgave him. He wept, not from grief, not from guilt, but from the simple, crushing weight of love that would never truly die. No matter how many times the world turned to dust, the candle burned brighter. The mist receded slightly. The House of Hollow Time stood stronger, and somewhere beyond the mist, far beyond the broken fields and shattered towers, a clock began to chime. Not in sorrow, not in hunger, but in hope, one clear, sweet note at a time. Evander closed his eyes again and remembered. The candle flickered low. Evander sat in the deepening dusk, the hourglass still glowing faintly on the mantel, casting long silver beams across the House of Hollow Time. Around him, the air hung heavy with unspoken stories, the breathing mist pressing gently against the walls like a tide that refused to recede. He thought briefly that maybe this was it. the end of his story. A silent guardian tending the broken clockworks of memory until the world itself forgot how to dream. But something shifted. A vibration in the floorboards, so faint it might have been imagined. The distant sound of footsteps, not the ghostly wanderers of memory, but something heavier, real, cutting through the fabric of this fragile world. Evander stood slowly. The mist at the windows churned, rippling outward. A road had formed beyond the house. Not the wild, broken ruins of Graven Hollow, but something new. Splintered, changing, a winding path paved with shards of forgotten time, fragments of mirrors, pieces of cracked watches, pages torn from diaries long burned. It stretched away into the mist, toward a horizon stitched with the faint silhouettes of other towns, other lives. Evander felt it deep in his ruined chest. The hollow was not done, not entirely. The cost of his sacrifice had held it at bay, but fractures remained. Splinters in the skin of reality, where the hunger still seeped through. The mist stirred again, and he saw them. Figures moving along the road. Not hollow men, not remnants, people, real people, travelers, pilgrims, each dragging their own burden of memory and regret, each drawn by the faint pulse of the hollow, still beating deep under the world's skin. They did not see the mist that coiled around their ankles. They did not hear the ticking beneath the ground. They only felt the ache, the absence, the unnameable hunger for something lost, something that could never truly be returned. Evander pressed a hand to the window, watching them stumble forward blindly. He knew what would happen. The hollow, weakened but not destroyed, would whisper to them, offer bargains, trade memories for solace, time for peace, love for oblivion, and one by one they would fall, unless someone guided them, warned them, held the thin, fraying line between forgetting and remembering. Evander turned back to the room. The silver hourglass shimmered softly, its sands unmoving. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a trap. It was a lighthouse, a beacon, a promise that memory could survive the hunger. He took it carefully from the mantel, cradling it against his chest. The house groaned softly, as if mourning his departure even before it began. He crossed the threshold, boots crunching on the road of splintered mirrors and bones. The mist closed behind him. The house of hollow time disappeared. Only the road remained. He walked, each step a prayer, each breath a battle. The travelers moved around him, their faces blurred, their voices muffled by sorrow. He could not save them all. He would not save them all. Some would choose to forget. Some would choose to feed the hollow. Some would fall before they even realized the danger. But some would hear him. Some would remember. That was enough. It had to be. Hours or days passed. Time flowed strangely here, pooling in deep eddies before rushing ahead in impossible tides. Evander's scars ached. The silver hourglass grew heavier with every step. At a bend in the road, he found a boy sitting alone, cradling a broken pocket watch in trembling hands. The boy's face was tear-streaked, hollow. Without thinking, Evander knelt beside him. The boy flinched, but Evander only held out the hourglass. The boy looked up, wide-eyed. The hourglass pulsed gently. The boy hesitated, then reached out and touched it. The broken watch in his lap mended itself, its cracked face sealing, its hands beginning to turn once more. The boy gasped. He looked up at Evander with something like wonder, something like hope. Evander smiled, a cracked, tired smile. "Remember," he said softly. The boy clutched the watch to his chest and ran down the road, lightness returning to his steps. Evander stood slowly. The hollow growled in the far distance, sensing its prey slipping free. but it could not move as easily. Now. Not while the hourglass burned, not while memory held. Evander walked on, through valleys where the mist writhed like dying serpents, across bridges stitched from the bones of forgotten prayers, past crossroads where broken signs pointed in every direction at once. Each encounter left a mark. Each memory saved weakened the hollow's reach a little more. But each act cost Evander a piece of himself too. He felt it. The sands, leaking faster now, the glow of the hourglass dimming ever so slightly with every traveler he aided. He was bleeding away, becoming less a man, more an idea, a keeper, a reminder. But he would not stop. He could not, because even here, even now, memory mattered, stories mattered. The fight to hold on, to remember who we are, who we were, mattered. And if he was the last light left in this splintered, bleeding world, then so be it. Ahead, the road split into countless paths, each one leading into thicker mist, into deeper forgetfulness. Evander stood at the crossroads, the hourglass heavy in his hands. He looked down each path. Faces flickered in the distance, some pleading, some lost, some already beyond saving. He chose a path without hesitation. The mist closed around him again, and Evander Price, keeper of Hollow. Time, guardian of broken memories, the last man who dared to remember, walked on into the bleeding future. The road twisted under Evander's boots, splintering into hundreds of thin, crumbling paths that led nowhere and everywhere. The mist thickened again, slick with the taste of rust and old sorrow. Somewhere overhead, the torn sky deepened into a darker, more oppressive shade, as if mourning what little light remained. Evander tightened his grip on the hourglass. Its silver sands pulsed faintly, slower now, every beat a reminder of how little time he had left to give. The travelers thinned behind him. One by one, they had taken different paths, some carried by hope, others swallowed by the thickening mist. A few had accepted the memories he offered, clutching broken heirlooms mended by the hourglass's dwindling grace. Most had not. He pressed onward. Each step dragged at him, the weight of his scars growing heavier, the fissures in his skin aching more fiercely with every mile. And then, the sound came, a single bell. Low mourning. It tolled once. The vibration traveled up through the soles of Evander's feet, into the hollow space left behind his ribs. He froze. Another toll. The air shifted. The mist churned violently, folding in on itself in great groaning waves. The ground beneath him cracked open in thin fractures, and through them he glimpsed endless caverns lined with spinning gears and rivers of screaming faces. The hollow was waking again. It had been patient, biding its strength, but now it stirred, furious at being denied. Evander looked down at the hourglass in his hands. The silver sands were fading. The glass itself trembled, hairline fractures spiderwebbing from the base upward. The morning bell tolled a third time. The force of it buckled Evander's knees. He fell, catching himself with one hand against the crumbling road. All around him, the mist shrieked with 1,000 lost voices. Figures moved within it. Corrupted memories, not of his making, but twisted by the hollow's spite. Phantoms wearing the faces of Leah, Jonas, Maver, faces stretched and broken, their mouths sewn shut with black thread, their eyes weeping streams of sand. They circled him, hands outstretched, whispering, "Turn it again. You can still save us." One last sacrifice. The hourglass vibrated violently, straining against itself. Another bell tolled, louder, closer. Evander staggered to his feet. He knew what this was. The morning bell was the hollow's final call, a signal that the last keeper was failing. that the hunger could reclaim what had been so briefly lost. If he fell here, if he turned the hourglass one more time to protect himself, the hollow would flood back into the world, and there would be no more second chances. Evander pressed the hourglass against his chest. It was so tempting to surrender, to fall into the fog, to be carried away on the tide of forgetting, to let the weight slip from his shoulders and dissolve into dust. One turn, one breath, one final oblivion. The phantoms pressed closer, their whispers grew sharper, cutting. You can't save them. You can't even save yourself. End it. He staggered down the fractured road, searching through the swirling chaos for any sign, any anchor, any reminder of why he still fought. Through the mist, he glimpsed something. Door standing alone, weathered, cracked, leaning on nothing. A door he recognized, the door to Leah's old apartment. He stumbled toward it, the bell tolling again, each vibration peeling layers of skin from his broken body. The mist howled, the phantoms shrieked. He reached the door, placed one hand against the wood. It was solid, real. Memories surged up from the broken places inside him. Leah laughing, teasing. Him for getting lost the first time he visited her. Jonas tossing him the keys to his father's broken truck with a grin and a warning. Maeva handing him an hourglass wrapped in oilskin, her hands trembling, her voice a low whisper. You'll need this whether you want it or not. He clutched those memories to his chest, refused to let them slip, refused to turn. The morning bell rang a final time, deeper, louder, a noise that splintered the ground and tore the mist to shreds. The hollow rose from the cracks. It was vast, beyond measure, a great blind serpent of sand and memory, its body stitched with faces screaming wordless prayers. It towered above him, mouth yawning open, ready to consume. Evander pressed the hourglass against his wounded chest. The fractures along its surface deepened. He heard the glass whimper. He heard the sand whisper. One turn, one last turn. He shook his head. I won't, he rasped. The hollow shrieked. It lunged. The door behind Evander swung open. Light spilled out. Warm, golden, impossibly bright. He staggered through the door just as the hollow's jaws snapped shut on empty mist. The door slammed behind him. Silence. Evander collapsed to the floor inside. He lay there for a long moment, trembling. The hourglass was still intact, but just barely. The sands inside glowed faintly, pulsing like a dying star. He sat up slowly. The room around him was not Leah's apartment. Not really. It was a stitched-together patchwork of every home he had ever known, every place he had once called safe. The hollow's power couldn't fully reach him here. Not yet. But it was only a matter of time. He could feel the pressure building. He would have to make the final choice soon, before the cracks spread. Before the last grains of sand slipped away. He looked down at the hourglass in his hands, at the pale reflection of himself in the mirrored surface, at the scars carved deep into his flesh, at the weight he had carried for so long. He closed his eyes and prepared for the choice that would either destroy him or free everything he had fought so long to protect. The room around him pulsed like a dying heart. Evander sat in the patchwork house of memory, the silver hourglass heavy in his hands. The wood grain beneath his feet vibrated with a low, distant hum, a pulse that grew fainter with each breath. Hollow battered against the door behind him. The morning bell's last toll still echoed in his bones. He could feel it. The hollow would break through soon. No barrier of memory or will could hold it forever. He had minutes, maybe less. The hourglass was fractured almost beyond recognition. Fine spiderweb cracks radiated from its center, and inside, The last remnants of the silver sand whirled sluggishly, barely clinging to existence. Evander rose slowly. His legs shook. His body, already more scar than flesh, felt heavy, unraveling from the inside out. Small streams of crimson sand leaked from the cracks in his skin, gathering at his feet. There was no future for him, only the choice. The final turn. The irreversible act. He crossed the narrow room, where the mist outside pressed harder against the thin, rattling windows. In the far corner, a mirror stood, tall, cracked, its surface smeared with old handprints. The mirror reflected not the room, but the hollow, a vast, gnashing wound stitched into the bones of the world. Evander approached. For a moment he simply stared at the reflection, at the monstrous thing he had fought for so long, at the face of despair itself. The hourglass pulsed against his palm. It was not asking anymore. It was pleading. He understood. The only way to finally starve the hollow was to destroy the last vessel, to destroy himself, to turn the hourglass one final time, not to buy more time, not to forget, not to escape, but to shatter, it completely, to break the wheel, and in doing so, to erase himself from memory, not death. Something worse. He would be forgotten by every soul who had ever known him. Leah, Jonas, Maeva. All the faces he'd fought to remember would lose him in turn. A quiet vanishing. A sacrifice no one would mourn because no one would remember to. Evander gripped the hourglass with both hands. He lifted it, stared into the swirling silver sands. They shimmered faintly. Each grain a memory, a laugh, a kiss, a song, a cry. All he had left. Tears burned his eyes. He whispered their names, Leah, Jonas, Maeva, his own, one last time, letting the sound of them fill the room, letting them anchor him one final trembling heartbeat longer. Then, with a sob that shook the fragile walls of the house, he turned the hourglass over. The mirror shattered instantly, spraying shards across the room. The mist howled, recoiling. The hollow screamed, not in rage, but in fear. The silver sands inside, the hourglass ignited, burning brighter than any sun, a flood of pure memory surging outward, consuming everything in its path. The door behind him exploded inward. The hollow rushed in, a mass of black gears, bleeding clocks, wailing faces, and it slammed into the wall of light pouring from the shattered hourglass. For a moment, the world balanced on a knife's edge. Then, the hollow cracked apart, split down the middle, bleeding shadow into nothingness. The mist evaporated. The broken paths vanished. The travelers scattered like seeds on the wind, free once more. Evander fell to his knees, clutching the remains of the hourglass. The silver sand poured out between, his fingers slipping into the cracks of the world. He smiled through the pain, through the fading. He had done it. He had ended it. But he could already feel himself slipping. Already, the room around him grew unfamiliar. The names he had clutched so tightly faded from his mind, like smoke through a shattered window. Even his own face blurred in the cracked reflections around him. He was being erased. Not killed, forgotten, unnecessary, wound healing over. He pressed his forehead to the floorboards, breathing in the scent of dust and old wood one last time, and then one final heartbeat, one final breath, one final slip into silence. The silver hourglass collapsed in his hands, its frame curling inward like dying petals, its sand scattering into the wind. Outside, where once mist had ruled, a faint golden light broke across the sky. A new dawn, a new story, one that would never remember Evander Price, but it would not have existed without him. And somewhere, buried deep in the marrow of time, the last grain of silver sand spun slowly, a single fragment of a name no one could quite recall, no matter how hard they tried. The morning bell fell silent. The hollow was sealed. The keeper was gone, and the world, blissfully ignorant of the sacrifice made for it, breathed easier. Evander Price became not a man, not a hero, but a space between beats, a silence between chimes, a scar too old to ache. The world forgot. Time moved forward, indifferent. The mist that once smothered Graven Hollow thinned, revealing hills of green and towns reborn in fragile hope. Rivers flowed clear again. Trees, long stripped to bare bones, budded once more under. Skies washed clean of sorrow. No one spoke of the hollow anymore. No one remembered the morning bell, the splintered roads, the bleeding hourglass. No one remembered Evander Price, not in song, not in whispers, not even in the bones of old legends. He had been erased, as if he had never drawn breath, never wept, never bled for a world too small to hold the weight of memory. But in places where the mist still clung stubbornly to forgotten corners, in the curve of a ruined stone wall swallowed by ivy, in the broken boards of an abandoned wharf where waves whispered secrets to the shore, in the tangled roots of the gnarled trees at the forest's edge, a faint echo lingered. Not a name, not a face. Just the feeling that something precious had been lost long ago, and in the very center of Graven Hollow's ruins, now a quiet meadow where wildflowers clawed up stubbornly through cracks in the earth, there was a stone, unmarked, unnoticed. Atop the stone sat a tiny object, small enough to miss if one were not looking carefully, a silver hourglass, whole, unbroken. Its frame delicate, its glass clear and pristine. Inside, a single grain of silver sand hovered between the bulbs, neither falling nor rising. Frozen, endless, waiting. Children sometimes found the meadow on summer afternoons, chasing dragonflies and wild laughter. They would stumble upon the stone, their voices falling quiet in its presence, struck by a nameless reverence they didn't understand. Some would pause, staring at the hourglass. Some would reach out, their fingers just brushing the cold glass, feeling a jolt of something old and aching and beautiful. Some would swear, later, that for a moment they heard a sound, a soft ticking, a distant, impossible chime. But none ever moved the hourglass. None ever turned it. The world had forgotten Evander Price, but the hourglass remembered. The sacrifice was not in vain. It stood as a monument that did not need names or dates or mourning songs. It stood because somewhere, deep inside every living soul that passed nearby, a fragment of the wound remained. A quiet, stubborn refusal to forget entirely. A feeling that love, even lost, even buried, still shaped the soil beneath their feet, still bent the rivers, still whispered in the wind. And when storms rolled over the meadow, the children said the hourglass would shimmer with a faint light, casting a long, thin shadow across the grass, like the last thread of a memory refusing to fade. They didn't know the name for it. They didn't have to. The hollow was sealed. The keeper was gone. But the grain of silver sand remained, spinning, waiting, not for salvation, not for hunger, but simply to be remembered, just enough to keep the world from forgetting itself. The wind stirred the grass. The sky stretched wide and endless overhead, and the hourglass gleamed quietly on its stone altar, patient beyond all measures of time. It needed no witness. It needed no mourning. It simply endured. The last gift of a man no one remembered. The final defiance against the slow, inevitable hunger of oblivion. The world spun on, and somewhere in the spaces between heartbeats, the grain of silver turned, once softly, eternally.